Chapter 1940. There were many reports of victory in Liuzhou. First, Ko Jianghuai joined forces with the Dragon Elephant Army to attack the Huangsongpu tribe's main camp. Not only did they successfully enter the camp and annihilate the supply camp, they also managed to kill Wanyan Yinjiang's elite cavalry. After which, Xie Shibian seemed to have been possessed by a celestial being and was able to predict the future. He led the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain to split into Fengxiang and Linyao. Not only did they successfully stop the sneak attack of the Southern Dynasty soldiers, but at the same time Chao Wei's cavalry, who had already entered the hinterland of Gusai Prefecture, turned around and killed the remaining 6,000 soldiers and the Southern Dynasty cavalry that had been dragged into the mud by Xie Shibian's monk soldiers. After this battle, Chao Wei, who had already won the title of Chao Benlei, along with the Huangsongpu forces who had suffered 2 losses, slowing down their speed, Xie Shibian also led the monks to assist Qingcang City. The situation in Liuzhou was really good. However, during this period of time, a report accusing Xie Shibian was passed around the Luzhou provincial governor manor and sent to the north resisting city manor. It caused North Jebei City, which was covered in the autumn rain, to have a sharpness and killing intent. Su Fengmian stood in the solemn military room and gently put down the memorial that Yang Guangdou, the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Qin Shiliang, and Ko Jianghuai, the general of Liuzhou, had signed. Inside this yamen, in addition to the young lord, there was also the deputy Jidushi Yang Xinxing, the administrator Li Gongda, and Bai Yu, the provincial governor of Liangzhou, who had rushed over after hearing the news. Su Huang, who had just been promoted to the governor of Jibiqing, and Li Yanchao, who had just transferred from the left cavalry to the right cavalry as the first deputy commander, and many other border generals. The initial content of the report was written by a Yuzhou infantry colonel who was promoted to Phoenix Troop's town commander. It described in detail the start and end of the Battle of Phoenix Troop. There was only one point in the report, which was that during the Battle of Phoenix Troop, Xiaxi had overestimated the strength of the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain. After 2 days and 1 night of defending the city, the monk soldiers only participated in the defense of the city. This caused the soldiers of Phoenix Troop to be sacrificed for nothing. There were only 92 Yuzhou infantry soldiers left. Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, who were both to choose twin jade annulus, were 1 main general and 1 deputy general of Liuzhou. The 2 were young but talented in the art of war. No matter what their original intentions were, from today onwards, their positions in the hearts of the Beiliang Frontier Army would become a watershed. This was because on the main battlefield north of Qingcang City, Ko Jianghuai had defeated the Huangsongpu army. His actions of first dying to the Longxiang army and then the Liuzhou cavalry did not lose the respect of the Longxiang army. He also won the gratitude of the refugees in Liuzhou. On the other hand, Xie Shibian had the advantage in the Battle of Miun. Outside Liangzhou Pass, everyone felt that Xie Shibian was more suitable than Ko Jianghuai to be the general of Liuzhou. Although Xie Shibian and Chao Wei's cavalry still managed to wipe out 10,000 infantry soldiers and 3,000 Southern Dynasty cavalry, there was no doubt that Xie Shibian had lost a lot of people's support. From this north resisting city to the infantry commander's tent in Yuzhou, the Beiliang Governor-General's office and the left and right cavalry bases, they might all have doubts about Xie Shibian. This was because the Beiliang Frontier Army hated not helping people on the battlefield. This was because the Su family army had suffered many similar hardships in the early days when they were expanding the territory for the Liang imperial court. Xie Shibian's actions in particular were suspected of conserving his strength to gain military merits. Under the various actions of the young lord, the old General Yang Xinxing of the spring and autumn period was gradually accepted by the Beiliang Frontier Army as a deputy Jidushi. His right to speak on this matter was second only to Chu Lushan's protectorate. But the more this was the case, the more Yang Xinxing did not dare to act on his own. Therefore he had to send someone to inform the young lord. Yang Xinxing knew that this matter was tricky and troublesome. It was not about how to appease the general of the Flying Phoenix Army, or even how to deal with the deputy general of Liuzhou, Xie Shibian, who had 2 great military exploits. But if he was not careful, it would cause a split between the old and new generals of Beiliang. What was more troublesome was this situation that the entire Beiliang Frontier Army was aware of. The instigator was the young lord standing behind the desk. From the earliest Yuzhou cavalry general Yu Wandao, who was the commander of the Yuzhou cavalry, Xie Shibian Su Huang, who held the power of Liuzhou, or even earlier the Yuzhou general Huang Fuqiu, the deputy general of the heavy cavalry, Su Beiji, and Qin Shiliang of Liuzhou. The new Prince Liang not only promoted young people, he also did not hesitate to make an exception to appoint a foreigner who had no connection to Beiliang. Therefore, this impeachment letter broke the window paper that even Yan Wenluan and He Zhonghu, who had deep roots in the border army outside of Beiliang, did not dare to, or more accurately, did not want to, break the window paper. Bai Yu took a few steps forward and picked up the letter. Mr. White Lotus, who had poor eyesight, almost pressed the letter to his nose. Such a comical scene, but no one could laugh. Liuzhou Provincial Governor Yang Guangdou, who was the #1 official of Liuzhou, after reading through the contents of the report, he used a meticulous small script to write a full 300 words, criticizing Xie Shibian's actions. His words were even harsher than the Phoenix Legion general guarding the city. Especially that sentence, "My Yuzhou infantry can die, but your Xie Shibian's monk soldiers can't die?" This sentence pretty much hit the nail on the head of the entire northern Liang border army. Qin Shiliang's words were relatively gentle, but he still did not agree with Xie Shibian's actions. Liuzhou Deputy General Xie Shibian's actions did not go against the Beiliang military laws, but it was unforgivable. As for Liuzhou General Ko Jianghuai, who was not on good terms with Xie Shibian in West Chu's Guangling Road, his words were even more concise. Read it. Chapter 1941. Although Bai Yu's eyes were hurt from reading, it was only because he held the book at a higher height than ordinary people. This little celestial master of Mount Longhu was recognized as being able to read 10 lines at a glance and remember everything he saw. Therefore he browsed through the memorial very quickly. He turned around and handed the memorial to Li Gongda. He was the first to break the silence and said with a smile, "Ko Jiangjuan's handwriting is not bad." Then there was nothing else to say. Yang Xinxing suddenly smiled bitterly. He thought that Bai Yu, who had a high status in Beiliang, could help him and the prince break the deadlock. He didn't expect him to be so shameless. The administrator took the memorial as if it were a hot potato. After a cursory glance, he wanted to say that Qin Bie's handwriting was actually not bad, but after a moment of hesitation he decided to simply keep silent. He handed the memorial back to Li Yanchao behind him. Li Yanchao was the new deputy commander of the Right Cavalry, who was known as the Four Fangs of Northern Liang along with Ning Amei, Dian Xiongchao and Wei Fuqing. Li Yanchao's betrayal of He Zhong's left cavalry and his action of joining the Brocade Partridge Shou Kang's command had caused a stir in the Liangzhou border army not long ago. After Li Yanchao roughly read it, he didn't beat around the bush like Bai Yu and Li Gongda, the two leaders of Beiliang. He looked up and said directly to the young prince standing behind the desk, "I think that General Xie's action is not only not against the military law, but also excusable." After seeing the new prince nod, Li Yanchao continued in a clear voice. Provincial Governor Yang suspects that General Xie does not want to lose the monk soldiers of Mount Lantua. However, I think everyone in the room knows the extent of the Battle of Meun. What about the casualties of Chao Wei's 10,000 elite cavalry? What about the casualties of Xie Shibian's cavalry? I don't know Xie Shibian and I have never even met him. However, I think I know a little about how to use troops. That is, Xie Shibian will haggle over every detail on any battlefield that he is in charge of. In this attack and defense of the Phoenix Legion town, if the monk soldiers of Mount Lantua had participated in the defense early and didn't deliberately show flaws, allowing the Beimang barbarians to attack the city many times, how could the 10,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry stay outside the city for 2 days and 1 night? If not for that, how would Chao Wei's cavalry be able to stop Beimang's remaining troops in time? In my eyes, General Fengxiang has done well in defending the city, and it is reasonable for Xie Shibian to be impeached for his fallen comrades. However, General Xie has done even more meritorious deeds. Li Yanchao handed the booklet to a lieutenant behind him, then he cupped his fists at the young lord and said in a deep voice, "If General Xie comes to North Rejecting City in the future, I, Li Yanchao, would like to lead your horse for you." As the deputy commander of the Beiliang Frontier Army, he was willing to lead a horse for someone else. This was almost the highest praise he could give to the person who got off the horse. Butcher Su Shao had only led a horse for someone else twice in his life. This time it was for the old soldier of the Lotus Seed Camp, Lin Dofeng, who was still alive. The other time was for someone who had died in battle. He was leading the horse back to the camp for the corpse on the horse's back. Su Huang, who had a beautiful beard, frowned and asked, Wang Ye, did General Xie come to this north-resisting city with a memorial to explain himself? We shouldn't just listen to one side of the story. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, there was a memorial, but it wasn't about the matter of Fengxiang defending the city. It only explained why he didn't let the 10,000 monk soldiers in the military town defend the town to the death, and why he didn't stop the 7,000 infantry soldiers who returned without any success. Regarding the fact that the monk soldiers of Mount Lantuo of the Lin Yao army did not take the initiative to leave the city, this was indeed a strange matter. North resisting city was surprised. Since the facts proved that Xia Shibian had predicted the enemy's moves, then with Xia Shibian's decisiveness on the battlefield, he should have let the female bodhisattva of Mount Lantuo lead the army out of the city. With the speed of Chao Wei's cavalry that had shocked Liang Meng, they should have been able to stop the infantry soldiers at the southeast border of Gusaizhou. However, Xia Shibian missed out on this easily obtained military merit. In reality, as long as this deputy commander of Liuzhou could wipe out the 20,000 infantry soldiers and 6,000 cavalry of the Southern Dynasty's border army, and bring a perfect end to most of the western battlefield outside of Qingtsong, then even with this impeachment memorial, North resisting city would not be so hesitant. Since Beiliang established itself as a vassal through martial arts, in the end military merit still counted. Yang Xianxia asked curiously, Wang Ye, how did General Xie explain himself in the memorial? Su Fengnian said calmly, Xie said that the battle in the west of Luzhou had already been settled. Beimeng only left a few thousand foot soldiers and horses, so it would not affect the overall situation. However, the area north of Qingtsong City in Luzhou is the main battlefield against the Pu tribe of Huangsong. Whether he has 15,000 Lautua mountain soldiers or only 10,000 monk soldiers to reinforce Qingtsong City, the difference of 5,000 is like the difference between heaven and earth. Su Huang, who was well versed in military matters, was silent for a moment. He sighed and said, I am also willing to lead General Xie's horse. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled. Thank you for the 2 unbelievable victories at the western border. In the second battle, Ko Zhonghuai even reduced the hundreds of thousands of cavalry in the Pu tribe of the Yellow Song dynasty to the level of infantry. The situation at Liuzhou is already clear. Next it will be up to us outside the Liangzhou Pass. Then Su Fengnian sat on the chair that originally belonged to Yang Xianxia. He spread out a piece of paper and before he started writing, he raised his head and said to everyone, I will write a letter to explain to the general of the Flying Phoenix Division. Everyone, I will have to trouble you with Jubei City and the area north of Jubei City. Everyone in the room felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. Li Gongda turned around and stepped over the threshold. He smiled at the city magistrate beside him and said, Our Wang Ye's handwriting is really good. It is full of vigor and spirit. Su Huang also smiled and said, We are so far away. Aren't you afraid that the Wang Ye won't be able to hear you? Li Gongda lowered his voice. The Wang Ye is a grandmaster in martial arts. Su Huang gave him a thumbs up. Admirable. Su Fengnian, who was thinking about the wording of the letter, did not know whether to laugh or cry. At this moment, the spy from the Fu Shui division led a woman to the door. The woman was wearing a curtained hat. Then the 2 stopped in their tracks. Even though this small house was worthy of being Beiliang's most important place, the spy still felt that it was inappropriate to introduce the woman's identity. Su Fengnian stopped writing and looked up. The spy did not make a sound. He only moved his lips cautiously. East Peak. Su Fengnian stood up in shock. Chapter 1942. Su Fengnian stood up and put down his brush. He had only finished writing half of the letter he was going to send to the military town of Phoenix when he told Yang Xianxia to leave the writing desk empty for now. The deputy Jidushi, who had a profound state of cultivation not inferior to Li Gongda's, naturally agreed calmly. Su Fengnian let the head spy of the Dushui chamber return to the torture chamber first while he led the woman in the veil hat to the study next to the signing room of the second hall. When he personally closed the door gently, the woman took off the veil hat, revealing a face that could be described as beautiful. She who could bring light to a simple study, was indeed a stunning beauty. In this North Jebei city, only the beautiful Jiang Ni could completely suppress her. When Su Fengnian saw the lips of the spy of the Dushui chamber, the words that came to his mind were not the more natural 2 words of Dongyue, but the relatively rare Dongyue. This was the real reason why Su Fengnian was so cautious. It could even be said that this was a long and unknown wait. Before Su Fengnian inherited the throne, he had been waiting for the day when the truth would come to light. Back then, when he went to Beimang alone as His Royal Highness, it was like a chess piece at the end of the first stage. Even if the first soul-stirring battle of Beimang had ended and the second battle was in full swing, it could only be considered the middle game of the spring and autumn chess game. It could only be considered the real end of the game when he waited for this woman. Everyone knew that Nailan Yusi, who was more like a vassal king than Zhao Bing, the king of Yen, was the only surviving strategist of the spring and autumn period. He was often followed by 5 beautiful personal maids with strange nicknames: Fengdu, Dongyue, Shishu, 3 Corpses and Qinglu. She was one of Nailan Yusi's maids, Dongyue. Facing the young king with the most military power in the Liang dynasty, she was calm and composed. She smiled and said, "Since your highness is so nervous, you must already know about the plan of my master and his old friends. This is even better. It saves me from wasting my breath." Su Fengnian did not sit down. He just stood near the ordinary boxwood desk and did not bring a chair for her. The two of them stood facing each other like this. He went straight to the point and said, "The pawns chosen by my master, including the king of the old north courtyard, Su Huainan, are all dead now. Who is left on your master's side?" Dongyue smiled and said, "Why don't you guess, your highness?" Su Fengnian narrowed his almond-shaped eyes and his face darkened. She turned a blind eye to this and clicked her tongue. Right now, it is widely known in the Central Plains that it took 10 years to cultivate Song Yushu, 100 years to cultivate Su Fengnian, and 1,000 years to cultivate Lu Dongxian. Your Highness, your current performance is somewhat unworthy of the name. The 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn was a game of chess. Hong Jia's journey to the north was the curtain of the war of spring and autumn. It was not only the ending but also the first move. The 4 scholars from the Central Plains who originally belonged to different camps worked together to set up the trap. Huang Longshi of the Spring and Autumn 3, Li Yishan of the Tide Listening Pavilion, Li Yishan of the Southern Border, and Li Yishan of the Liang Emperor Shi Yuan Binshi. Ever since the founding of the Great Qing dynasty, the northern grassland cavalry had invaded the south countless times, causing chaos in the Central Plains. The Central Plains commoners sought refuge and migrated, retreating from the north to the south time after time. Later generations were used to calling them crossing the south in clothes. For example, during the last years of the Yongxi dynasty, the Lu family blessed China, and the Sweet Dew crossing the south, after the fall of the Great Feng dynasty. The Jiang family of Dechu, the most powerful family in China during the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, was regarded as the rightful successor of the Great Feng dynasty. However, roughly half a year later, an even greater scale of escape erupted. The most unyielding West Chu, the Southern Tang, the Western Shu and the Western Shu, who were used to living a debauched and extravagant lifestyle, and the most sentimental Western Shu, in addition to a small number of Northern Han and Great Wei adherents, all headed north one after another. In the end, they mostly converged at the present-day Liangyu province of the northern Liang Path and the river province of the Tu Huai Path. Almost the moment before Su Shao was slaughtered and enfeoffed as a prince, they successfully fled to the northern Mang and southern dynasties Gusai province and Longyao province. Almost immediately before Su Shao was slaughtered and enfeoffed as a prince, they successfully fled to the northern Mang and southern dynasties Gusai province and Longyao province. Among them there were many well-hidden key players. One was Su Shao, who had been enfeoffed as prince of another surname by the old Liang Emperor Zhao Li, suddenly declaring that he would kill all the scholars of West Chu and have their corpses block the estuary of the Guangling River. Because the Battle of the Western Wall was too bitter, regardless of whether it was the defeated Dechu Jiangshi or the victorious Su Shao, both sides were filled with resentment. As a result, when Su Shao, who was at the peak of his power, publicly announced these words in the imperial court of Great Peace City, not only was the court shaken, it also caused the remnants of West Chu, whose mountains and rivers had been shattered, to despair. That lame Su clearly did not even give them the opportunity to be peaceful dogs. Other than fleeing, what else could they do? Another time, Zhao Li's son Zhao Bing, who was supposed to be the ruler of Western Chu territory by virtue of his military exploits, who later became the king of Yanqi in Nanjiang, not only did he not go to the richest Guangling circuit, he did not even go to Jinggan circuit and Qingzhou, which dominated the hinterland of the Central Plains. At that time, Zhao Li only intended to let this son who was most like me, go to Huainan circuit, probably because he wanted to let Zhao Bing who was good at war, and Su Xiao the only king of Liang with a different surname, be neighbors when Su Zhao's title as king of northern Liang circuit was a foregone conclusion. But in the end Zhao Bing who had wanted to go to the Liangliao Pass, went to the most unexpected southern border, a place that was vast but full of miasma. Unofficial history said that before the bloodthirsty Zhao Bing left the capital, he chopped down a 1,000-year-old cypress tree in the prince's mansion and swore to kill all the young men of southern Tang who were taller than a wheel to vent his anger. Coincidentally, when Zhao Bing was on his way south, southern Tang, who definitely did not resist tenaciously in the late spring and autumn period, actually rebelled and killed thousands of Gu Jiantong's soldiers who stayed behind. Zhao Bing originally wanted to deliberately wrestle with the new prince of Guangling Zhao Yi in Guangling circuit for fun. He had no choice but to suddenly speed up his horse's hooves and head south. The third time was when Su Xiao was infeft as Prince of Liang the earliest and Prince of Liang the latest. The key point that people did not think deeply about the first two times, Yuan Binshi, who was half an inch away from the Emperor of Liang, watched coldly from the sidelines because he was happy to see it happen. The Zhao family that he was loyal to wanted to truly let the fire of peace spread across the world. They had to let those 100 years of country, 1,000 years of family, noble families, move the tree and die. They wanted to let them obediently move to the Liang capital under the eyes of the emperor under the threat and intimidation of the two princes of Liang, which was very likely to come true. Like the scholars of the imperial examinations, all the heroes of the world will enter the Zhao family's jar, at the same time to prevent future troubles. It could prevent the remnants of the countries that had lost their foundations from rebelling and could also ensure that when Liang went north to conquer the grasslands, there would be no worries in the south. It was a pity that at this time unforeseen events occurred. Su Zhao's army traveled west very slowly. They enjoyed the scenery along the way and even stopped in Jizhou for a full month. When Yuan Binshi and the Liang imperial court realized that the situation was not right, they let Kai Nan, who was the Minister of War and the #1 fierce general under Gu Jiantang, who was stationed in Gangnam-do, lead the army all the way to try to stop the flood of remnants that suddenly gathered in the northwest direction and force them to turn east and enter Taiyan City. Because the scale of Kai Nan's army was not large and they were extremely unfamiliar with the northwest terrain, in the end, they were still unable to stop that vast and mighty group of spring and autumn remnants. At the time, Jizhou's Han family, who had defended the border pass against the grassland horse hooves for generations, did not make a move that time, leading to the tragedy of their family's destruction. As Zhang Julu's teacher and father-in-law, the old Grand Secretary of Liang, even though he indeed had personal grudges with Jizhou's Han family, to say that the old Grand Secretary alone caused the destruction of an enormous family that had been loyal for generations was overestimating the weight of that scholar in name in the imperial court and also underestimating the old Grand Secretary's scholarly character. In reality, the truth was that the Liang imperial court did not dare to openly take their anger out on the Beiliang frontier army, so they could only make an example out of the Jizhou Han family. Apart from this, they also had Yang Xinxing, who was also a meritorious official of the spring and autumn period, lead troops into Jizhou. In addition, Kai Nan stationed troops at the Beiliang border, doing his best to reduce the space for retreat for the Beiliang cavalry. In this game of chess, four strategists sat on the four sides of the central plains, acting as national players. They rolled up their sleeves and placed a piece together. In the end, the person who needed to pick up a piece from the chessboard was His Royal Highness of Beiliang, who had inexplicably gone to Beimang. In the study only the scent of books was faint. A man and a woman fell into a long silence. Su Fengnian suppressed the impetuousness in his heart and tried to be as calm as possible. Is Wang Sui, the consort of Eastern Yu, a chess piece of Nailan Yusi? The woman's eyes widened. The stunned expression on her face was not fake. She asked curiously, "Did Mr. Li not mention it to your highness?" Su Fengnian's heart trembled, but he said expressionlessly, "No." Nailan Yusi's servant girl was very intelligent. She immediately saw through the mystery and suddenly realized. So when Mr. Li passed away, he already regretted it. She tilted her head. Since Mr. Li changed his mind before his death and didn't want you to carry this heavy burden, Your Highness, why are you so persistent? Su Fengnian said bluntly in a deep voice, "People are dying everywhere in Beiliang. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you." She glanced at the young king who was holding the sword with his left hand and raised her eyebrows. She was full of eagerness. Bailiang's sword has always been called Grand Su style by the military of the Central Plains. The implication is that all the swords in the world imitate Su style. Your Highness, can you let me have a look? Su Fengnian sneered. Can a dead person lift a sword? She pretended to touch her chest in horror. This is not the posture of asking for help. No wonder my husband said that the northwest is beyond the Great Wall. There was a sudden loud bang. This beautiful young woman had her back against the door. Her smooth and white forehead was pressed down by a hand. Chapter 1943. Blood oozed out from the corner of her mouth as they looked at each other. At the beginning, there was a mocking smile on the corner of her mouth, but when she looked at the young king's eyes, it was a kind of desperately trying to restrain the ruthlessness. On the verge of life and death, she couldn't help but remember that her master once laughed and said that when he was angry to the extreme, the scholars couldn't wait to cut off the arms of all the martial artists in the world, and the martial artists also couldn't wait to cut off the hands of all the scholars that held books. Just when she thought that Su Fengnian would kill her even if the secret was buried in the pile of old books, there was a light knock on the door. Then she saw the young king's face suddenly changed into a clean and warm smile. He glanced at her with undisguised disgust, then he let go of her hand and pushed her to a wall. He gently opened the door. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and turned her head to look. As a result, she saw a face that even she was stunned. After the woman of the same age stepped through the threshold, she immediately looked around. After seeing him, she quickly looked at him from head to toe, and then awkwardly put on a cute and naive look as if she didn't see anything. The woman who brought a pot of tea said to Su Fengnian indifferently, "Hee, the young lady said that you have a guest here, so I brought a pot of tea for you." Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. Jia, that girl who was observing in all directions, must have added that the guest was a beautiful woman. Otherwise, with Jiang Ni's temperament, she would be too lazy to care whether the guest in Su Fengnian's study was the Emperor of Beimang or the Emperor of Liang. Jiang and I seem to have just found the big living person standing at the foot of the wall. She lifted the warm teapot in her hand and asked, "Young lady, are you thirsty? Do you want to drink some tea?" The maid, Dong Yue, who had already wiped the blood, deliberately pulled her collar together and bit her lips as if there was a lingering fear in her heart. She was really pitiful. Jiang and I suddenly widened her eyes and secretly stepped on the back of the king of Beimang's foot and twisted it fiercely. Dong Yue saw that the poor king who had his back to her seemed to take a deep breath and then pressed his hand on the head of the peerless beauty. Compared to the palm that pressed on her forehead, it was much gentler. He smiled and said, "What are you thinking? This aunt who is good at retaining her youthful appearance is from Nanjiang. She is Nailan Yuxi's personal maidservant. She came here to discuss business with me. Just now, I didn't control of my strength and I accidentally hurt her." The little mud man glanced at the pale woman. Although he was still a little skeptical, the words aunt were extremely important, so he relaxed a little. Su Fengnian resentfully retracted his hand and said helplessly, Okay, I won't close the door." She curled her lips and turned around again. Her voice was not soft as she said to herself, "If you don't have a guilty conscience, why don't you just close the door?" Su Fengnian sighed and shook his head gently. He turned around and put the teapot on the table. Then he took out 2 white porcelain teacups that he bought from the market outside the North Jebei city. After sitting down, he waved his hand to the maidservant Dong Yue and said, "Sit down and drink tea." She hesitated for a moment, but still moved a chair and sat across the table from the young king. Just now the two of them had a falling out, but it was as if nothing had happened. At this moment the study room was calm and peaceful. All of this was due to the woman who brought the tea. She had complicated thoughts. Right now, in the Central Plains, just the great city of Liang, which was known as the most virtuous city in the world, had countless extroverted young ladies who had almost eloped to Liangzhou just to see Su Fengnian. This was not some exaggerated joke on the streets. A person's life was less than 100 years, and it took 100 years to cultivate Su Fengnian. This new King Liang could be said to have achieved success by taking an unconventional path. She originally did not believe that a man in the world could be more romantic than her master. Seeing it with her own eyes today, although she still felt that he was not as good as her master, he was not far off. Su Fengnian leaned forward and poured a cup of tea for her. The woman's thoughts were as deep as the sea. The servant girl, Dongyue, who had been at loggerheads with the young king, straightened her expression and did not pick up the teacup. She slowly said, "Before I left, my master told me that the matter of the chess piece was only a telepathic connection with Tide Listening Pavilions, Mr. Li. The two of them had no contact after parting on the way to Grayton City. My master also said that because Mr. Li had spoken frankly at that time, he had guessed the identity of the chess piece that Mr. Li had chosen. With Mr. Li's cautiousness, it must have been Su Huainan. In fact, Su Huainan was the most unexpected. He actually succeeded in becoming the king of the northern courtyard of Beimang. My master also said that with Su Huainan's contradictory personality, this chess piece might not be able to last until the end. Of course, Su Huainan would not reveal the secrets of heaven. At most he would choose to give up." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "When Su Huainan saw me at the bank of the Ruoshui, he could have lived, but the old man still chose to die. It was probably because he did not think that Bailiang could defeat Beimang. Rather than letting down the Central Plains and then letting down the Empress of Beimang, rather than being disappointed, it was better to not see and not be bothered by it and not do anything." The servant girl, Dongyue, raised the teacup and took a sip. She said softly, "My master said that his chess pieces were not as important as Mr. Li's. There were more of them, exactly 10 of them. However, after 20 years most of them died young. 3 died of illness, 2 committed suicide. Because they had thoughts of betrayal, they were cleaned up by the men of sacrifice by my master's side. 2 more died. Therefore on this trip to Bailiang, I, Dongyue, was the one who delivered the message for my master. Just as your highness had guessed, Wang Sui was one of my master's most attentive chess pieces. However, this old prince consort of Dongyue, one of the 4 great generals of the spring and autumn period, was the same as Su Huainan. Both of them showed signs of indecision. Compared to the other chess piece revealed in my name, Wang Sui was more selfish and harder to control." Su Fengnian fell into deep thought and did not speak. She said with a grave expression, "Your Highness, please remember the other person. His surname is Wang and his given name is Du. He once called himself Old Man Xianxia. The old man himself did not have many achievements in the southern dynasty, but his family had cultivated a young man who could not be underestimated. Wang Jingchong is the current Dongyiabo of Beimang. Moreover, the Wang family's heart is definitely with the Central Plains. There is no doubt about it." Tu Fengnian frowned. The Southern Dynasty's valiant border general Wang Jingchong was no stranger to the entire Bailiang frontier army. This person was currently leading his direct troops to Gusai Prefecture and was in charge of intercepting the Yuan Dao cavalry that was penetrating deep into the enemy territory alone. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, "The last remaining chess piece?" She shook her head and said, "Regarding this person, my master said that it was not yet time to use him." Su Fengnian was stunned and said self-deprecatingly, "Could it be that he still has to wait until I defeat Beimang?" She said calmly, "Master did not say, so I naturally do not know." Su Fengnian did not make things difficult for this maidservant and did not ask further. Knowing the identities of Wang Du and Wang Jingchong's chess pieces was already a pleasant surprise. She did not finish her cup of tea and stood up. "My master finally said that Huang Longshi had finally chosen Zhao Zhu, the crown prince of Yanqi, as the true son of heaven. That was why the southern frontier army was able to move up north so smoothly. Master hoped that your highness could guard the northwest with ease. When you succeed in the future and help Zhao Zhu complete the magnificent feat of incorporating the vast grasslands into the new Liang territory for the first time in history, your highness and the Bailiang frontier army will definitely not be mistreated." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. Before she left, she blinked her eyes and the corners of her mouth curled up. She whispered, after saying "my master said" so many times, I actually also want to say something off topic. "Your highness, you are more handsome than I imagined." Su Fengnian did not have any complacent expression. Instead he immediately said to the direction outside the window in a hurry, "Jia Jia Jia, you are not allowed to tell this to Jiang and I." The confused maidservant, Dongyue, only vaguely heard a laughter coming from outside the window behind her. Su Fengnian reached out to touch his forehead and sighed. "It's over." The maidservant, Dongyue, picked up the curtain hat again and bowed to the young king who was about to get up to see her off. She gently advised him, "Your highness, you don't have to see me off." Su Fengnian glanced at the teapot and smiled bitterly, "Don't talk about drinking tea. It will be lucky if I don't drink arsenic." she left with a smile. She directly walked out of the mansion. After riding a horse and leaving the north resisting city under the escort of the spies of the Fu Shui house, she looked back at the towering city wall and couldn't help but cry. She didn't know whether it was for her master or for someone else. In the city, Su Fengyan walked alone to the military office of the mansion. He sat back in the seat belonging to Yang Shenxing and continued to write the letter. He suddenly stopped writing and looked outside the house. In this secret meeting, the maidservant of Nailan Yusi did say a lot of truth. They were all the words from the bottom of Nailan Yusi's heart. But it was not necessarily true and not false. And he was the same. He had to tell the truth and the lies. But these were nothing. What made Su Fengyan sad was that the haggard counselor who had been imprisoned on the top floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion for 20 years, a peerless scholar who cared about the world, didn't even care about the ownership of the world for such a disappointing student like him. That man was supposed to be, but before he died he didn't tell Su Fengyan in detail about the spring and autumn chess game, which was planned by Li Yishan and could be said to be the proudest of his life. He didn't leave anything, no last words, no words. Why did he regret before he died? Su Fengyan couldn't understand. After he finished writing the letter and handed it to the torture room, he took a pot of green ant wine and went to the ridge of the highest building in the north resisting city. He sat cross-legged and looked to the south. It was said that his master's hometown in the south was a small town with beautiful mountains and clear waters. There were stone arch bridges. Su Fengyan didn't drink. He lay down holding the wine pot and looked to the sky with tears on his face. Probably only when he secretly thought of Su Xiao and Li Yishan and remembered their time. This young vassal who seemed to have everything but also seemed to have everything to lose, was feeling a little wronged. Chapter 1944. This autumn rain was particularly long. It was a rare thing in Bailiang where there was little wind and rain, but it delayed the construction of North Zhexiang City. Because of this, the administrator almost jumped up and cursed. He either stayed in his office and sighed, or went to the top of the city wall with an oil paper umbrella to watch the sky and bitterly waited for the sky to clear up. As a result, the water level of the river south of North Zhexi City soared. The rainwater mixed with the yellow sand, making it extremely muddy. This made some of the young heroes and heroines who came to the bazaar outside the Great Wall to enjoy the scenery outside the Great Wall the most annoyed. It was supposed to be a cool autumn season, but the autumn rain made the ground muddy. They used to walk hand in hand with their admirers by the river at dusk every day, enjoying the scenery outside the Great Wall where the lone smoke in the desert stretched straight to the long river and the round sunset. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was around, they would hold the hands of the heroines and fairies, which could be considered a beautiful thing. But now they could only complain that the heavens were not on their side. They could only hide in the inns and restaurants of the small town bazaar. This group of young people was traveling to the northwest this time. Most of them were seniors from the Jianghu sects or family friends who looked after them. All day long they had to stare at those old fellows who had one foot in the grave. It was really boring. It was not that no one wanted to ride their horses to the west, but the area around North Zhexi City was filled with the armored cavalry of the Bailiang Frontier Army. Perhaps the only people who did not have any complaints about this autumn rain were Miss He and Su Ying in the red robe. The two of them would often pester Jia to fly on her sword and bring them straight to the sky, breaking through the thick dark clouds. The moment they saw the light in the sky, Jia would always be filled with joy. Even Su Ying would never get tired of it. Jiang and I was already extremely adept at flying on her sword. As early as when Chao Chongqing brought her to Beimang, she had already seen the scenery in the sky. It was just that she was obviously very close to the young girl who had taken the initiative to serve as her ear and ear. When Dong Yue, Nailan Yusi's personal maid, visited the Red Robe residence, it was Jia who immediately informed her. Afterwards, she also told her the contents of the conversation in the study room word for word. Therefore, no matter how unconstrained Miss He's thoughts were, Jiang and I, who was all alone and had no one to rely on in North Jiu City, never refused anyone who came to her. For example, when she looked up and saw the wild geese flying high above North Jiu City, she would fly on her sword and chase the wild geese to the south. Occasionally she would even help Jia catch 2 or 3 pitiful wild geese and tie a piece of paper to their claws. It was very childish. Last time, Jiang and I wrote the sentence, Su Fengyan is a bastard. Su Ying, who never spoke, wrote he is not a bastard. Miss Hehe then had Zhang and I right, they are all right. However, it was unknown whether those wild geese that had suffered in the south would still dare to return north next spring. Later the three women fell in love with the game of flying immortal. First, Zhang and I flew into the sky above the sea of clouds. Before the first adventure, they must have discussed beforehand that they didn't dare to jump into the sea of clouds casually. After all, if they accidentally jumped into the sea of clouds and smashed a hole in Su Fengyan's mansion at lightning speed, they probably wouldn't be able to play in the future. The three of them picked the position of the great Liang dragon sparrow that was hovering above the river. Then Jia, who was not afraid of anything, was the first to jump down. She put her hands together and her head was facing down. Finally, she fell head first into the mud at the bottom of the river. At that time, the young king, who was dealing with military affairs in the conference hall, suddenly felt a majestic aura that was like a flying sword that pierced straight into the earth. He immediately flew to the top of the city wall. As a result, he saw a funny scene that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Weighing the falling speed and the young girl's physique, Su Fengyan had to secretly take action, so that Jia would be able to reduce most of the momentum before she hit the river. Finally, he had to run into the turbulent river, splashing countless water, grab her feet, and pull the young girl out of the mud like pulling a radish. On the way down, the red robe that quietly controlled the aura fell not far from the river. Because it did not hit the ground head first like the young girl, it was not a big problem. However, the young king was like a drowned rat. Without waiting for Su Fengyan to get angry, the three women ran away. After that, the game went on as usual, but Jiang Ni's flying sword was much lower. She also chose to fly at night. Therefore, in the middle of the night, the loud sound of dumplings being thrown into the pot could be heard every few days. Over time, the people in the small town became accustomed to it. If it was only this kind of harmless nonsense, Su Fengyan would turn a blind eye to it. But one night, when the wind and thunder were particularly loud, the young king who was discussing the matter of grain with Bai Yu in the house heard an unusual thunderous sound from above. Su Fengyan immediately realized that the situation was not right. Sure enough, he caught the three sneaky women on the spot. Among them, Jia, whose hair was standing up and whose face was black, was tightly holding an iron rod that was intertwined with lightning like a white dragon. Her eyes were shining brightly and she was full of joy of success. Su Ying was looking at her with envy. Only Jiang and I was the most cautious. After putting away the great Liang dragon sparrow into the sword box, she wanted to tiptoe back to the small house. Su Fengyan immediately flashed by, grabbed the little mudman's collar and took her back to the courtyard. In the rain, the three women stood in a row. Jiang and I seemed to be looking up at the moon with an innocent face. Su Ying secretly looked at the fine iron rod in the girl's hand that was crackling with lightning. Jia, who did not realize that she was in trouble, looked at Su Fengyan with vigilance. Her face was saying, "Don't you think about my rod or I will fight you to the death." Su Fengyan asked with a serious face, "You even dare to summon the lightning from the sky without permission? Do you want to die?" Jiang and I secretly made a face and muttered. Obviously she was going to break the pot. Su Ying's face was blank and innocent. Jia simply turned around and was too lazy to argue with this guy. Chapter 1945. In front of the three people, Su Fengyan, who did not have the majesty of a vassal king nor the aura of a great master, waved his sleeves and cut off the curtain of rain above the women's heads. It was actually a small world of its own within the abbot. He bent his finger and gently knocked on the little clay man's forehead, then touched Su Ying's head and finally turned Hehe's body over. He looked at the three people and smiled bitterly. "During this period of time, there are a lot of things to do in the vassal mansion. I really can't leave to accompany you." "This is my fault," the little clay man whispered. "Who wants you to accompany me?" Su Fengyan stared at her. Although in front of outsiders, the young vassal king could not do anything to her and always gave in to her, so that the entire vassal mansion was in awe of this female sword immortal. But when Su Fengyan was really angry, Jiang and I was immediately beaten back to her original state. At this moment she was standing in the same place like a cicada in winter, and even she did not know where to put her hands. Su Fengyan sighed and said softly, "In the future if you want to go to the sky to play, it's okay. But remember, you must never go to the sky outside the territory of Bailiang." After the sage of the Zhang family turned into a rainbow, although the Confucian spirit accumulated for hundreds of years cut off the connection between heaven and man for the human world, a cornered dog will jump over a wall, let alone those celestials in the sky who are used to looking down on all living beings. In Bailiang, even if they want to take the opportunity to do something to you, I can at least help to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. But if I can't get to other places in time, you will be in danger. I'm not deliberately saying this to scare you. If I didn't sense it and went out of body to the side of the sea of clouds and watched coldly from the side, I'm afraid that the next thunder you receive will really be the heavenly thunder of purple clouds with hidden murderous intent. Zhang and I lowered her head guiltily and did not dare to look at Su Fengyan. The girl looked at the iron rod in her hand, which was still like dozens of slender white pythons, and was reluctant to part with it. Su Fengyan looked at the girl whose hair was standing on end and her face was charcoal black. He couldn't help but laugh. I didn't say that you can't keep the stick. You took such a big risk and got struck by lightning. The residual lightning on the stick can still last for a few days. There's no reason not to treat it as a treasure. Su Fengyan looked up at the curtain of rain and said to himself, it's just that it's impolite not to reciprocate. After hearing the young king say, I'll be right back, Zhang and I said worriedly, do you want me to lend you the great Liang dragon sparrow? Su Fengyan smiled and shook his head. His figure rose from the ground and disappeared in a flash. Not long after that, the three of them heard a thunderous roar from the sky. It was Su Fengyan shouting, get lost. Zhang and I was secretly speechless. This guy's courage was really big. In the night, two bright white rainbows cut through the sky. One fell into the grassland of Beimang, and the other fell into the territory of the Central Plains. After half an hour, Su Fengyan floated back to the ground. His hands were behind his back and his expression was calm. Zhang and I asked curiously, did you fight with someone? Su Fengyan nodded and didn't explain in detail. In the face of the 7 immortals who were sitting in the clouds and spying on northern Liang's luck, Su Fengyan beat up 2 of them, who dared to walk out of the gate of heaven, and turned them into banished immortals. Zhang and I took off the sword box and handed it to Su Fengyan with both hands. Su Fengyan was puzzled and asked, what? The little mud man wrinkled his nose, you take it for safekeeping so that we don't get into trouble. Su Fengyan said helplessly, in the end, North Rejecting City is a boring place for you. I'm just angry that I can't let you have fun, not angry that you sneaked out to play. Who would believe that? In any case, the little mud man didn't believe him. Just now he glared at him fiercely. Su Fengyan smiled. With his hands behind his back, he suddenly stretched out a hand. 3 to 4 inches above his palm, there was a fist-sized snow-white ball. It was actually condensed from the essence of lightning. The 3 girls immediately opened their eyes wide as if they had seen the cutest thing in the world. Su Fengyan retracted his hand and allowed the ball of lightning to hover in the air in front of him. He reminded them with a smile, don't touch it with your hands. A normal Vajra physique won't be able to withstand an explosion. In today's world, other than me, perhaps only the white-robed monk Li Dongxin's prayer beads, Dong Tai's sword, and Tuoba's fist can remain unharmed after touching it. However, as long as you release a little bit of your qi, it won't consume too much energy and you can easily control this ball of lightning. Let me say this first, you can't let this little thing leave this courtyard and you can't let it touch anything in the courtyard. Otherwise, I won't have the time and energy to help you get another one. Su Fengyan stretched out his hand and lightly touched the iron rod in the girl's hand. I left a trace of my qi on it. When you're not playing with the ball of lightning, it will automatically hover near the rod. Zhang and I and the other 2 nodded vigorously at the same time, really like chicks pecking at rice. Jia didn't say anything else. With a bang, she placed the iron rod on the limestone floor of the courtyard. Then the ball of lightning began to slowly revolve around the rod. The 3 heads gathered together and stared intently at the little toy that was spinning leisurely. Su Fengyan, who was left aside, glanced at the cracked ground and sighed. He left the courtyard and returned to the house. When the figure of the young lord disappeared, the abbot world that was supported by his qi also quietly dissipated. The small courtyard reappeared in the rain. The 3 women moved the chairs and benches to sit side by side under the eaves. Zhang and I suddenly came back to her senses. She turned to Jia and said seriously, little the copper coins to repair the ground, you can't renege on the debt. The girl who was nicknamed Little slowly shook her head. Zhang and I frowned and said, Jia, you can't do this. Girl rolled her eyes and leaned over to whisper in Zhang Ni's ear. After Jiang and I heard the secret words, she coldly snorted and said loudly, "Little hee-hee, you don't need to pay this money, I also won't pay. Isn't someone's female confidant all over the world? Even a woman that you've only met once will fall in love with him. Why would you lack these copper coins?" In fact, Su Fengnian, who had not walked far away from the courtyard, suddenly staggered and shook his head with a bitter smile. In order to escape the debt, Jia Jiajia was very disloyal to her friends. She leaked the last words of the maid, Dong Yue, to Heaven's secret. Chapter 1946. During the summer, the heat stopped and the autumn air gradually turned serious. The eagles felt the air and hunted down flocks of birds. Every year at this time, the Bailiang Frontier Army would perform a ceremony that had been passed down for a long time. It was the eagle sacrifice ceremony. Some of the eagles that were carefully cultivated by the Fu Shui room to serve as the crossbowmen's arms would be released outside Liangzhou Pass. Hundreds of riders would go out and the eagles would soar high into the sky. It was a spectacular sight. Because the crossbowmen on white horses outside Liangzhou Pass had all been transferred to the battlefield in Liuzhou, the North Jebei city's manor was replaced by He Zhonghu's left cavalry. First, the old commander was seriously ill and only had the title of left cavalry in name. This eagle sacrifice ceremony was also the end of the old commander's career. Second, a new left cavalry deputy commander named Lu Diyun, who had been away from the border army for more than 10 years, happened to be leading the hundreds of riders north of North Jebei City to release the eagles. On the day of the eagle sacrifice ceremony, the sun was setting in the west. The North Jebei City's horse path was crowded with people. The right cavalry commander Jean Partridge Shou Kong, accompanied by Li Yanchao, slowly walked to the top of the city wall with a straight face. When he saw the old commander He Zhonghu, who had to wrap himself in a thick fur coat after taking off his armor, his expression became slightly better. The fierce border army general Li Yanchao, who betrayed the left cavalry and joined the right cavalry, had an indifferent expression. Only in the depths of his gloomy eyes was there a bit of guilt. However, he was still ashamed but not regretful. The young lord with a cold blade at his waist stood in the middle of the city wall. He looked into the distance and saw a flock of eagles soaring in the sky. He felt relaxed and happy. After seeing Lu Diyun leading hundreds of riders back to North Jebei City, Su Fengnian turned his head to look at He Zhonghu beside him. His old body could no longer bear the bumpiness of the horse's back. Even hanging a blade and hanging an armor had become an extravagant hope. After the eagle sacrifice ceremony today, the old commander would officially leave the battlefield. However, the old commander had no children and had no residence within the pass. Su Fengnian originally thought that based on the old commander's temperament, he would choose to retire in North Jebei City. After all, he could hear the familiar sound of horse hooves closer. Su Fengnian had even personally asked people to set up a quiet residence near the manor. However, in the end, the old commander actually wanted to take advantage of the fact that he still had some strength to go to North Jebei City to take a look around. He said that North Jebei City was Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall of Bailiang. He had long heard that it was rich and populous there. He had been dealing with horse dung outside the pass for 20 years. No matter what, he should go there to enjoy life and eat a few good meals. Su Fengnian was well aware that the old commander was lying when he said that he wanted to enjoy life. He did not want the left cavalry's commander-in-chief to meet him, the retired emperor, face to face from time to time. Even if the successor did not think this way and would not feel that his hands and feet were tied, the old commander still insisted on his opinion. Su Fengnian had no choice but to let Qin Yunchui, Lin Dofeng, and the other elders of the Su family, who were of the same generation as the old commander, come forward to persuade him. However, it was useless. He Zhonghu, who had spent his entire life on the battlefield, was suddenly determined to leave. He Zhonghu suddenly sensed the young vassal king's line of sight. With a carefree laugh he said, "Wang Ye, don't try to persuade me. I, He Zhonghu, admit that my talent in leading troops in war is mediocre. The reason I was able to win those battles was because of the former Su family's old soldiers and the current Bailiang Frontier Army. I relied on being able to listen to other people's opinions. I am ashamed to say that I have been in the military for nearly 50 years. During the Spring and Autumn War, I don't dare to say that I led the troops in every battle, but I did not do any less than Lu Yuanji, Wei Taizhan and the other old fellows. I don't know why, but in the end I was the least injured and I could not compare to the great general. I remember when the great general brought us to Bailiang, no matter how good our friendship was, in order to be able to fight for the position of a strong and powerful general, each and every one of us did not even care about face. Wang Ye, do you know how Wei Taishan mocked me in front of the great general? Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. The old man laughed and said, Lu Yuanji and Wei Taishan, those two old bastards, were actually aiming for my position at that time. Lu Yuanji, who had studied for a few days, had a lot of evil ideas in his stomach. He did not want to be a bad person, so he urged the old coarse Wei Taishan to tell the great general that He Zhonghu suffered very few injuries on the battlefield, but I did not suffer any major injuries. However, I, who never got sick, might get sick and die. Therefore, when we fought the Beimang barbarians, He Zhonghu should not lead the cavalry to charge and break through the enemy lines. If He Zhonghu was careless and died, not only would he lose his life, but he would also lose the face of the border army. How could this be tolerated? Of course, I couldn't tolerate it. So, in a fit of anger, I went to the great general and pulled out the third-generation Su family saber that was hanging at that time. I left behind a ruthless sentence. Either I become the deputy commander of the cavalry, or I take the saber and chop that bastard Wei Taishan to death. The great general had no other choice but to agree. Su Fengnian could not help laughing. The terminally ill old man no longer spoke. Together with the young vassal king, who was not yet 30 years old, he gazed into the distant north. Back then, Zhao Go had meticulously collected a sea of intelligence related to the northwest border army. The Liyang Ministry of War had used this to come to a conclusion. The Bailiang cavalry was divided into mountains, and there were many conflicts between the cavalry and infantry. The relationship between the cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass and the Liangzhou cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass was even stiffer. The generals outside the pass and the military officials inside the pass also had mediocre relations. Therefore, the so-called 300,000 Bailiang cavalry could be united only because Ren Tu Su Xiao was not dead, enough to intimidate the heroes, and also because Qin Jibao, who had great prestige, was standing behind the old man. But during the transition period between the two generations of cavalry, it was very likely that there would be great turbulence. Yan Wenluan, as the head of the Bailiang infantry, would be determined to have Bailiang Protector General Qin Jibao take the position. Zhong Honggu, He Zhonghu, and the other important mountain leaders who controlled the cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass might not be willing to lower their heads. Huda City's Lu Jinu would listen to Ren Tu's last wishes. Li Yanchao, Li Mofan, and Cao Xiaojiao were young and strong generals who were famous in Bailiang for being rebellious and difficult to tame. The Bailiang Protector General Qin Jibao and His Royal Highness Su Fengnian were mostly dishes. Among these generals, the existence of the spring and autumn old man He Zhonghu was rather special. While he and Yan Wenluan had once been Zhao Chongling's supporting dragon sect general, and thought highly of Qin Jibao, he was publicly recognized as the most loyal to the old prince of Liang, Su Xiao, and the least selfish. Even the Great Peace City Ministry of War, thousands of miles away, could see this scene. The Tide Listening Pavilion naturally saw it even more clearly. So Yan Wenluan's two deputy commanders, Wei Taishan and Lu Yuanji, left the infantry. The spring and autumn old generals like Zhong Honggu and He Zhonghu, who were of similar age and seniority, firmly held the border cavalry. Then Qin Jibao rode alone to Shu and betrayed Bailiang. The arrogant Zhong Honggu lost his integrity. The power of the Bailiang cavalry was transferred to Yuan Zuozong, Jean Partridge, Zhou Kong, and the others. At the same time, the outsider great ancestor Gu was like a nail hammered into the infantry mountain as a deputy commander. Then, with His Royal Highness's approval and the secret support of Mount Qingliang, Qin Shiliang, a poor scholar from Gangnam-do, suddenly took power. While there was great resistance to the reform of salt and iron, causing Qin Shiliang to stumble and die, before some people could clap and cheer, Qin Shiliang started to set up 14 captains with real power. Su Fengnian, who had just been crowned as the king of Bailiang, was especially decisive. After Yan Wenluan met Su Fengnian, she maintained her silence. This caused the military reform that involved half of Bailiang Road to proceed smoothly. Chapter 1947. As for the Bailiang cavalry's gradual change in power, the Liyang imperial court, which had already lost Grand Secretary Zhang Julu, was completely helpless. They could not sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight, nor could they interfere. However, in the end, the changes in the Bailiang frontier army all came from Li Yishan's words when he was alive. The Su family's 300,000 troops were enough to deal with Beimang's southern dynasty border army. However, if they were to face the grassland cavalry, they would not be able to handle it. The outcome would not change with the Bailiang cavalry being the best in the world. Therefore, the Bailiang frontier army needed a new batch of people to create a new atmosphere. If one said that Su Fengyan was biased towards Su Beiji and Qin Shiliang between the two young strategists, in terms of selfishness he might be biased towards Su Beiji. However, in Li Yishan's heart his expectations for Qin Shiliang were slightly higher than Su Beiji when he was alive. Today, Qin Shiliang's reputation in the Bailiang frontier army, especially among the refugees and the Liuzhou cavalry, was not inferior to provincial governor Yang Guangdou and Liuzhou general Ko Jianghuai. He was also very close to Yu Wandao Chao Wei and other young generals. Su Beiji, who was also the transport envoy and deputy provincial governor of Bailiang, could be said to be like the sun in the sky. During his time as the Lingzhou provincial governor he had a deep relationship with Lingzhou General Han Laoshan and Huang Xiaokuai, who had real power within the borders. When he returned to the border army, the Su family's old soldier Lu Dian, who held a lot of power, led over 100 elite cavalry to appear outside the city walls. The old commander, who originally had his hands on the cold arrow pile, turned his body. He did not call the young man prince, only holding Su Fengyan's hand. The old man, who had mixed feelings, said softly, "It's been hard on you." Su Fengyan held the old man's hand instead. "It's a little hard, but it's not bitter." The benevolent old man asked with a smile, "Then I can rest assured?" Su Fengyan nodded and smiled. "Don't worry, old general." The old man did not let Su Fengyan escort him out of the city. It was just a simple and crude carriage. The retainers were the 4 or 5 old soldiers who left the left cavalry with the old marshal. They were together in life and death. It was the same on the battlefield. After the carriage left the city, a rider had already stopped outside the city. The old coachman who didn't like this rider originally didn't want to stop, but He Zhong seemed to have expected this. He lifted the curtain and asked the coachman to wait for a moment. After the deputy commander of the right cavalry, Li Yanchao, got off his horse, he looked at the old man who was struggling to get off the carriage. He did not deliberately go forward to help him. He Zhong suddenly walked to Li Yanchao's side and stretched out his hand to pat the back of the warhorse. He smiled and said, "It is worthy of being the Bailiang horse that is unique to Silken Pasture. Although its leg strength is slightly inferior to that of Courtyard Pasture's A-class warhorses, it is most suitable for cutting through enemy lines." Li Yanchao's mood was complicated. He didn't reply. The Silken Pasture and Courtyard Pasture were located to the left and right of Lianglong. The former had a better relationship with Zhou Kang's right cavalry, while the latter had a better relationship with the left cavalry. This was because the elders in charge of the two pasture were mostly from the left and right cavalry. How could Mount Qingliang and the Governor-General Manor order the allocation of A-class and B-class warhorses? Naturally, the pasture didn't have the authority to make any decisions. However, there were some top-notch A-class warhorses. Because of their scarcity, the pasture would naturally reserve them for the high-ranking officers of the left and right cavalry. This was also a reasonable move. The 2 generations of vassal kings of the Bailiang Su family had never interfered in this matter. After Li Yanchao was transferred from the left cavalry under He Zhong's command to the right cavalry, the first thing Zhou Kong did was to present this warhorse to this valiant general of the Bailiang's 4 fangs. The commander's seal and tiger tally were actually things that followed closely behind. The stooped He Zhong and the tall and sturdy Li Yanchao slowly advanced side by side. The old man said softly, "General Zhou's management of the army is strict. Most of the brothers by your side have violent personalities. After you are transferred to the right cavalry, you must not act arrogantly. Don't leave any evidence that can be used against you in trivial matters. It's not worth it." Li Yanchao nodded and said, "This general has already greeted my brothers." This time, Li Yanchao's official position change led to a significant change in the Liangzhou cavalry. This was because Li Yanchao was not only transferred to the right cavalry alone, more than 10 of his trusted lieutenants and commandants had also become Jean Partridge's subordinates. However, other than Li Yanchao who was promoted, the other generals were all transferred or demoted by 1 rank. After all, Zhou Kang's left cavalry had already established a solid foundation. If more than 10 people were suddenly promoted, the old men of the left cavalry would probably rebel. Fortunately, Zhou Kong and Li Yanchao had long reached an agreement on this matter. Li Yanchao's brothers were easy to talk to. From this, it could be seen that Li Yanchao truly had an extraordinary ability to control people. After all, in the officialdom, when one person achieved the Tao, all his chickens and dogs would ascend to heaven. This was common sense. He Zhong suddenly smiled calmly and said softly, Yanchao, I know you are very confused. Why did I tell you to give up when I clearly could have stayed on as the left cavalry's commander-in-chief for another year and a half? It is clear that I want to use an outsider's Yu Wan Dao and not you, Li Yanchao, to take the first position of the left cavalry, right? Li Yanchao nodded. This was like a family's property. No matter how big or small it was, if the father was willing to give it to an outsider rather than the eldest son of the first wife, anyone would have complaints. Especially if the eldest son of the first wife was not the kind of son who was destined to lose the family property. The old man suddenly smiled. Li Yanchao, there is something that you young people may not care about but old people like me as well as Wei Taishan and Li Yuanji all care about. That is that our family property in the border army is actually not ours, but the Su family's. It is the new and old Liang princes. The old man looked at the fierce general of Beiliang who wanted to speak but stopped. He waved his hand and said, Don't be in a hurry to refute. Let me finish. There is no need to say more about the great general. Even you all are convinced. In reality, from the spring and autumn period to the present Xiangfu, from Liang to Beimang, no one is unconvinced. When it comes to the new Liang prince, you all may be convinced, but generally speaking, you cannot admire and respect the great general. To tell the truth, I He Zhonghu am no exception. However, don't forget, this is not a reason for us to have soldiers for ourselves. It is not a reason for us to treat the soldiers under our command as exclusive property. Of course, if you say that our young princes are ambitious and ruthless, just like the 3 generations of Liang Emperor, then you, Li Yanchao, Chao Xiaojiao and the other famous troublemakers in the army, in order to protect themselves, everyone holds on to military power to leave a way out for themselves. I He Zhonghu can understand, but... The old man lightly stamped his foot on the road that was slightly softer after the continuous autumn rain. He continued, It is just that in Beiliang, from the 2 generations of vassals, to us old people, to Lu Jinyu and Wang Lingbao, to you all, and finally to the young people who have just entered the border army in this bitter and barren land, there is no need for ambitious and ruthless people. Our Beiliang cavalry only wants to be heroes. The old man finally reached out and patted Li Yanchao's broad shoulders. He smiled and said, Since every one of the 300,000 cavalrymen is a hero, then does it make a difference whether you, Li Yanchao, kill the enemy in the left cavalry or the right cavalry? In my opinion, there is no difference. The old man turned and walked towards the carriage. He raised his arm high and gently waved goodbye. Li Yanchao faced the old man's back and straightened his back. He cupped his fists and said in a clear voice, Old commander, please wait. Watch how I, Li Yanchao, destroy the Beimang cavalry. The old man did not stop and did not speak. He only cupped his fists high above his head. Chapter 1948. In the study room next to the second hall's signing room, an old man and a young man were sitting on 2 chairs, a stool and a chess block, chatting. The chess piece was placed on a small stool, so the 2 people playing chess could only hold their respective chess boxes. At first, when they heard that a fierce battle was imminent, even Li Gongda of the front hall, and Bai Yu of the household hall, came to watch the battle. Some military counselors who had nothing to do for the time being even came together in a grandiose manner, causing the study room to not even have a place to stand. It was enough to show that the outcome of this battle on the Rowan board was eye-catching. After all, one of the players, the young vassal king, was not only Li Yishan's brilliant disciple, he was also regarded as the younger brother of the 11th Dan great national player, Su Weisheng. There had long been rumors that Su Fengyin indeed had an extremely tenacious chess muscle and great chess strength. As the opponent of the young vassal king, Chancellor Wang was even more of a learned scholar who was like a grandmaster in the literary field of Liang, and was also Su Weisheng's teacher. Although there had never been a famous chess game that was passed down to the world, everyone felt that even if Chancellor Wang's chess strength was not as good as Su Weisheng's, he should still be a match for the young vassal king. Especially when the old man placed the white chess pieces, his elegant demeanor of rolling up his sleeves with one hand and twirling the chess pieces with the other hand was really dazzling. He was indeed worthy of being the second chair of the Shangyin Academy, a scholar, a sage and a moral grandmaster. Probably because the old man's aura was too strong, almost no one saw the helpless face of the young king who was being challenged. Mr. White Lotus, who didn't care about trifles, squatted beside the chess block, wishing that he could stick his eyes on the chessboard. Along with Chong Sui, Su Huang and Su Weisheng, Jean Baosher was one of the disciples of Han Guzi. She stood behind the old man without any expectation. She didn't want to come here to make a fool of herself, but she couldn't stand this old man's pestering, so she pulled him here to boost her courage. In the old man's words, this old man and Su Fengyan's chess skills were on par, and the odds of winning were 50-50. If there was a peerless beauty by his side encouraging him, he would be able to take down the Su Fengyan in one fell swoop. However, Jean Baosher knew the old man's chess skills very well. He was really a stinky chess player. Not to mention that he was miles away from her senior martial sister Su Weisheng. If she played against him, she would be able to beat the old man until he threw away his helmet and armor. He would definitely win every game. However, Jean Baosher and Su Fengyan knew the true weight of the old man, but the people in the room and the heads crowding at the window didn't know. Therefore, after more than 10 moves, Bai Yu, who was proficient in chess, frowned and was confused. Those people who were in the dark felt that it was really King Mysterious. Chancellor Wang was indeed a national chess player. Every time he placed a chess piece, not only did it return to its original state, but it also had a lingering aftertaste. Must be extremely brilliant. It must be their short-sightedness that they couldn't see the old man's profound layout. How could it be that the old man didn't have enough strength and randomly placed a chess piece? After about 30 moves, Li Gongda had already rolled his eyes and left with his hands behind his back. Many of the counselors who saw through the trick also silently left with a strange expression. Over time, when the chess game reached the ending stage, there were only 4 people left in the room: the seated chess players, the squatting Bai Yu, and the standing Jean Baosher. The old man, who felt that the situation was very good, turned his head to Jean Baosher and said proudly, "Daughter, how is it?" This old man's nickname of the chess saint, Iron Head Wang, is definitely not an undeserved reputation, right? How ferocious is his chess skills. Look at our Wangya, he is retreating step by step without any strength to fight back. The old man muttered to himself, "All right, I'll change my nickname in the future. I'll call myself Iron Cavalry Wang. It's exactly the same as the Bailiang cavalry. Their battle prowess is the best in the world." Then the old man smiled and lowered his head to look at Bai Yu. "Mr. Bai Lian, you have been squatting on the ground for a long time. Are you deeply intoxicated and unable to extricate yourself? Don't worry, this old man can understand." Bai Yu raised his head with a blank expression. "My feet are numb, I can't stand up." The old man's mouth twitched and he snorted coldly. Su Fengyan silently placed his chess piece and slaughtered a big dragon. In an instant, the white chess pieces were reduced to 7 or 8 pieces. The young king leisurely picked up the dead chess pieces from the chessboard and threw them one by one into the chess box on the old man's leg. The old man, who returned from the dumbfounded state, was about to stretch out his hand to stop the young king, but the young king squinted his eyes and said, "What, do you want to withdraw your chess piece? This time you can withdraw your chess piece, but don't think about coming to the study room to play chess with me in the future." The old man weighed the pros and cons and laughed. "This chess game is magnificent and wonderful. This old man, although defeated, is still glorious." Bai Yu finally stood up, bent down and rubbed his legs and said to himself, "In the future, if I come to this study room to watch people play chess, I will poke my eyes." The old man turned a deaf ear to his words and still had a satisfied look on his face. Jean Baosher picked a chair and sat next to the chess block to help the 2 men clean up the chess pieces. The old man held the chess box with both hands, restrained his smile and asked, "Do you know what Nalan Yusi is planning?" Su Fengyan put the chess box on the corner of the chess block. "Generally speaking, he wants me to help Yan Qi King and his son to delay the grassland cavalry for at least 1.5 years. Chancellor Wang said in a deep voice, "You agree?" Su Fengyan leaned forward and pinched a chess piece with 2 fingers, smiled faintly and said, "For this kind of thing, it's not about whether I agree or not, because it's meaningless. If I agree, do you really believe that Exen Li Yang will treat the Bailiang frontier army well? If I don't agree, do you think the Bailiang cavalry won't fight the Baimang barbarians?" Chancellor Wang's words were earth-shattering. Jean Baosher, who was bending down to collect the chess pieces, was so shocked that his hands trembled. "Then have you ever thought of meeting the old woman in private to divert the trouble? Let the Liang and Liao border army be in a mess, and then let Zhao Bing and Zhao Zhu, who have taken over Great Peace City, clean up the mess? Bailiang will reap the benefits. Not to mention anything else, at least there will be fewer deaths. Su Fengyan said calmly, I have thought about it. Jean Baosher's eyes widened, his face instantly turning pale. Su Fengyan smiled, but it's just a thought. The old man's expression was dark and hard to understand. He stared at the young king's eyes, trying to find some clues. The old man let out a breath. May I ask why? Su Fengyan gently put the chess piece back into the chess box. It's hard to distinguish between black and white in the world. But there are right and wrong in the world. The old man said impatiently, You brat, to put it simply, don't try to mystify things just because Jean girl is here. To be honest, even if this girl is willing to like you, do you dare to like her? Jean Baosher's face turned red as he stared angrily at the old man. Su Fengyan said helplessly, To put it simply, it's very simple. If Su Xiao was still alive, when faced with Northern Mang's million cavalry knocking on the pass and pressing down on the border, wouldn't he secretly run over to the old woman and tell her that he would lead the troops to attack Gu Jiantang, and that we would call a truce in Liangmang? The old man said exasperatedly, That's not the same. Su Xiao is Su Xiao. That old woman liked your father in the past, and your father as a man couldn't put down his face and didn't want to open his mouth. There's nothing strange about that. But you Su Fengyan are different. Su Fengyan did not answer the question. He looked at the old man and asked, If the Bailiang cavalry doesn't fight, are they still the Bailiang cavalry? The old man slammed the box heavily on the chessboard and reprimanded, You're already at death's door, why are you still acting like a hero? Su Fengyan's expression was normal. You can ask the Bailiang frontier army about this question and ask them if they agree. In the first battle of Liangmang, Liangzhou's Hutu city, Liuzhou's Qingcang city, and Yozhou's Gourdmouth, there were so many border soldiers. It's not that they're at death's door, they're already dead. It's useless to tell me that fewer people will die. The old man scolded, You're all idiots. Su Fengyan said angrily, Don't take advantage of your seniority. I'll really beat you up. The old man stretched his neck and made a chopping gesture, Come you brat, come over here. Su Fengyan immediately smiled mischievously, I don't dare. Come, let's play another game of chess. I guarantee you'll win. The old man was skeptical. Really? Su Fengyan said in a serious tone, A gentleman keeps his word. The old man immediately changed his mood. Jean girl, don't clean up. I'll play another game with this well-deserved Yilan national master. You can watch me kill everyone. The second game of chess ended quickly. The old man who was killed by the dragon got up angrily, waved his sleeves and left. He didn't even take the chessboard and the box. Jean Baofu didn't take back the chessboard and the box. Before leaving the study, she secretly gave a thumbs up to the young lord. Su Fengyan laughed it off. At this time, a spy from the torture chamber came to the study and whispered, Deputy Jidushi Lu came with 7 Lu family's children. Su Fengyan rubbed his eyebrows and nodded, Let them come here. The Lu family of Qingzhou was once a well-deserved noble family of the Jinggan Dao. It had many branches and leaves. Especially in the early years, under the shade of the old master Lu Feiqi, this towering tree, it could be said to be full of vitality. Among the Green Party, which was known for its love of unity, it was still known as the most outstanding branch of the Lu family. However, in the early days when the family moved to Bailiang, it was quite bumpy. The children of the Lu family had no achievements in the officialdom of Liangzhou or the literary circle of Bailiang. The main reason was that Lu Dongjiang, as the head of the family, had no official position for a long time. It was even rumored that his relationship with the future princess of Mount Qingliang was very sensitive. For more than 400 people of the Lu family, it was tantamount to one disaster after another. That confused time was the bleak time that the children of the Lu family didn't want to recall the most. Even the innocent children in the family were influenced by the elders. Their laughter gradually decreased, and the slightly harmless mischievous behavior would be loudly reprimanded by the depressed elders. Gradually the crying gradually increased. Originally, the Lu family mansion in Liangzhou was full of guests because of its strong family background. Now it changed from a sparse carriage to a deserted house in just a short year. However, the Wang family, which was also the in-law of the Su family in Mount Qingliang, was like a fish in water. Even the 2 ranches in Qianli and Tianjing were busy with the Wang family's children. Wang Linquan, who was originally the richest man in Qingzhou, was privately called the god of wealth by the officialdom of Bailiang. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the god of wealth Li Gongda. Chapter 1949. People were not afraid of being together. They were all in the same boat, but they were afraid of being compared with each other. The meteoric rise of the Wang family made the noble Lu family more and more discontent. It was said that a proud son of the Lu family who had just entered the Liangzhou government was ostracized by his colleagues. In a fit of anger, he threatened to return to his hometown and said to his uncle Lu Dongjiang, "I'd rather be a ghost in Qingzhou than a dog in Bailiang." All of this suddenly changed with the formal confirmation of Lu Qingyan as the future princess of Bailiang. First, a handsome son of the Lu family was able to hold a position of real power in the construction of Bailiang city. His rank was not high, but it was the beginning of the resurgence of the silent Lu family in the officialdom of Bailiang. After that, Lu Dongjiang, as the backbone of the large family, was even more prosperous and unstoppable. He was promoted all the way until he was now the deputy administrator of a province. He was a secondary class 2 official and a real governor of a frontier. In the whole territory of the Central Plains, the famous scholar Lu Huabua, who was only in his early 40s, could be considered the youngest local civil official leader. This time Lu Dongjiang rushed from Lingzhou to North Resisting City. There were 6 young people from the Lu family in the caravan. There were 4 branches in the Lu family, and each branch had at least one person who received this honor. They were able to meet the young vassal king together with the vice administrator. In addition to Lu Qingsong, who was an outstanding talent of the younger generation, who was originally an official in Beiqing, there were a total of 7 young people following behind Lu Dongjiang. Under the guidance of a military counselor wearing a green gown with a seal and ribbon hanging from his waist, they headed toward the study room next to the second hall's Qiushi Hall. Lu Dongjiang deliberately asked Lu Qingsong to walk side by side with him. Lu Qingsong was now in charge of the new city's provisions. He was officially promoted from a turbid to a clear rank. In layman's terms, he was promoted from an official to an official. Therefore, the deputy administrator, who had high hopes for Lu Qingsong, was full of smiles. Listening to the son of the Lu family talking about some interesting stories in Bailiang City, he nodded frequently and could not hide his gratification. After the unification of the Central Plains, the Liang imperial court, which had once suffered from the disaster of the separatist regime of the vassal towns, delegated far less power than it gathered. Apart from the Wangya, who had been conferred the title of king or vassal, even if you were an important minister at the border such as Jingshi or Jidushi, you absolutely did not have the right to establish your own government. Arbitrarily choosing an advisor to serve as an imperial court official with inferior rank was a major crime, which was to migrate thousands of li. However, Northern Liang was an exception. Regardless of whether it was the Liangzhou border army or the Guanyi officialdom, as long as one reached the 3rd rank, both the old and new generations of vassal kings would turn a blind eye to it. They had always allowed the handful of civil and military officials to set up their own manors and select their own aides and staff. Mount Qingliang and the Protectorate General Manor would basically happily approve of that extraordinary May. Bailiang was an exception and Lu Dongjiang was also an exception. However, the deputy administrator was a famous scholar. He cherished his reputation and did not promote the members of the Lu family to high officials. There were more than 10 people scattered, most of whom were just some minor officials who had just entered the ranks of the Qing stream. Perhaps this was a return of a favor to the son-in-law surnamed Su. The young man walking at the end of the line was from the 4th branch of the Lu family. There were few men in the 4th branch. When the ancestor Lu Feiqi was alive, the 4th branch was dispirited. This young man named Lu Qingqing took advantage of the fact that he was the tallest among the shortest. Otherwise, he would not have the chance to show his face in the study room. Lu Qingqing had been a nobody in the Lu family since he was a child. His aptitude was average and his literary talent was average. Naturally, Lu Dongjiang regarded him as a stupid junior who could not be of great use. However, he was gentle and never caused trouble, so he was not worrisome. This time, when they came to Bailiang City to meet the Lord, they brought along this silent young man whose father had died long ago. Lu Qingqing was alone at the end of the line. His footsteps were steady and he looked straight ahead. He did not look around curiously like other young men of the same generation, nor did he look complacent like the 2 Lu family members in front of him. Unlike the famous Lu Qingsong and the others, Lu Qingqing was still studying hard after he moved to Beiliang with his family. Therefore, when the Lu family collapsed, this young scholar who had no support in the family was the least disappointed. When the Lu family rose rapidly, he did not ask for an official position from the head of the family, Lu Dongjiang, who had both hands full of seals and ribbons, but went to the Green Deer Cave Academy in Yuzhou to study. His life was still ordinary. Until now, no one knew his identity as a member of the Lu family. When his classmates gathered, they would discuss current affairs and state affairs and sing loudly. Lu Qingqing had never been mentioned. This time, when the family sent a letter to ask him to leave for the border in advance, Lu Qingqing came. He only carried a bookcase and gritted his teeth to hire a carriage. Then he waited alone in the market town outside the city for the mighty deputy provincial governor. When Lu Qinghe, a peer of the third branch, learned that there was no senior official coming out of the city to greet them, he complained that the people in the city were too careless. If it were in Great Peace City with his uncle's prominent identity, even if the minister of the Ministry of Rights did not come out to greet them, there should at least be an assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights waiting outside the city. Lu Qingqing, who was ridiculed by his peers as a blockhead, still looked on coldly as usual. He only listened and did not say anything. The vassal king's study next to the summer-seeking hall was not big. There were only 4 chairs. The young vassal king had one. Of course, Lu Dongjiang had one. Lu Qingsong, who was the local bully of North Jieqing and the top young disciple of the Lu family, also had one. As for the last chair, after Lu Dongjiang sat down, his eyes indicated for Lu Qinghe to sit down. However, other than the look of an elder encouraging the younger generation, there was also a hint of warning not to complicate matters. This Lu Qinghe was the disciple of the Lu family who did not have a good time as an official in the Liangzhou Yamen and resigned. He was also the young famous scholar who left behind those harsh words. It was a pity that this was in Beiliang, where martial prowess was weak and literature was weak. Perhaps if it were in the Central Plains in Jiangnan, this would be an elegant story that would cause a sensation in the scholarly circles. Lu Dongjiang had long admired Lu Qinghe. He had personally praised him as the high standard of the Lu family. High standard meant high branch, which implied the height of the mountain tree. When Lu Qinghe was young, Lu Dongjiang did not hesitate to advocate for him in the literary circles of Jinggan Taoism. Lu Qinghe did not disappoint and earned himself the nickname of Little National Scholar. He was the only young man who could compete with the relatively more pragmatic Lu Qingsong. As for the dull and quiet Lu Qingqing, he was afraid that he did not even have the qualifications to be looked at seriously by the 2 young men of the same generation. There were 4 chairs in a study room. At that time the young king stood at the door to greet them. After leading them into the room, he smiled and stood behind the ordinary desk. He stretched out his hand and pressed down. After his father-in-law Lu Dongjiang and the 3 young men were seated, the young king slowly sat down. The study was not big, but there were a lot of books and files. There was no ice basin filled with ice placed in the corner. Even if the young king had opened the window before, it was inevitable that it would be a little cramped and hot. This made the Lu family's children, who wore tight clothes in order to not lose their etiquette, somewhat uncomfortable. Several young people standing behind Lu Dongjiang, Lu Qingsong, and Lu Qinghe were a little surprised after looking at the study from the corner of their eyes. The formal study used by the king to deal with important military affairs was too simple and crude. It could be described as shabby. In the early years they were far away in Qingzhou, Jinggan province. They were very curious about the degree of extravagance in Beiliang's Wutong'an. There was an interesting story in the literary circle of the Central Plains. There was a literary talent in Gangnam-do. He scolded Su Shao as the most important thing to be an official in the imperial court. After he retired to the countryside, he belittled Beiliang's border affairs as the most important thing in his life. The old man, who was from an ordinary aristocratic family, was good at writing graceful poems in his later years. His words were gorgeous and he especially liked to describe fun and drinking. He was praised by the Gangnam-do literary circle as writing about the affairs of the rich and noble family, with a melodious style. It can be described as a hall full of gold and jade. However, it was unknown how it spread to the poor Beiliang. His Royal Highness sent a letter to the old man's mansion. The general idea was that the old man, who was from a poor family, had never touched the threshold of wealth in his life. The letter was full of gold and jade, which was vulgar. At the end of the letter he also gave a gift of 1,000 sounds of rain hitting the banana leaves, 10,000 koi fish sitting in front of me. The implication was no doubt that the old man, who was only an official of secondary class 3, had seen a little bit of romance. Chapter 1950. After the old man received the letter he was furious, but he also acted as if he had received a treasure. He immediately went to the court to accuse the Bailiang Su family, saying things like, Su Xiao privately embezzled the funds of the Northwest Border Army, stuffing his own pockets to the extreme shocking, and Bailiang is poor, the Su family is rich. These famous sayings that were frequently used by officials and loyal officials were first spread from the mouth of the bone scholar old man. However, after so many years, when the news of 10,000 great snow dragon riders from northern Liang coming down to Jiangnan spread, the old man who had once said, I am willing to kill Cripple Su with a headbutt, immediately moved his entire family to Great Peace City. In one night, everything that could be moved was moved away. Not a single item was left behind. The conversation in the study, although the young king was not wearing his official robe, Lu Dongjiang was wearing a meticulous official robe. However, from beginning to end, there was not the slightest hint of a monarch and official meeting. It was more like a normal conversation between a father-in-law and son-in-law. Even when it came to official matters, the young king also had a smile. Most of the time it was the deputy administrator talking. The young man listened carefully and did not have the slightest impatience. During this time the young king even personally poured a cup of herbal tea for everyone in the room. The tea leaves were white frost tea from Lingzhou. Like the green ant wine, they were all rustic and belonged to the summer tea. It was not chewy and had a strong astringent taste. Only the poor old tea drinkers of Lingzhou were willing to taste it. The reason why the white frost tea could be chosen by the old King Liang, Su Xiao, as the tribute tea of the Qingliang Mountain Wang Mansion and the Bailiang Frontier Army was because there were more than 800 people who had entered the Liangzhou Frontier Army at the same time. Coincidentally, they all became fellow soldiers. In a battle outside the Great Pass, the 800 riders took the initiative to bring up the rear and all died in battle. In the sparsely populated Lingzhou prefecture, there were only 3 small counties. At that time, almost every household was dressed in white frost. In this regard, the children of the Lu family probably had not even heard of it. They were just wondering how the young king, who was used to the most luxurious and leisurely days in the world, could eat this. Of course, most of the young people, as long as they could drink this cup of tea, even if it was disgusting, they would still be happy. Only Lu Qingqing, who was standing in the corner, felt bitter. Even on the short journey into the city, he had been listening to Lu Qinghe and the others talk about the antiques and treasures that had flowed into the people from Bailiang Palace. Each of them had picked up a few pieces by luck, and each of them had regretfully missed a few. Lu Qingqing didn't have any spare money. Even if he did, he wouldn't buy it. At this moment, Lu Qingqing looked at the young king, who always smiled warmly, and felt that the aftertaste of the cup of tea was even more bitter. Lu Dongjiang should also know that the war outside the pass was in full swing, and the young king needed to personally deal with the heavy work, so he did not stay for long and quickly got up to leave. After the young king got up, he picked up a long brocade box placed in the corner of the table, walked around the table and handed it to the deputy administrator. He smiled apologetically. There is nothing good here. This box of bamboo pipe purple all was specially sent from Wutongan by me. It's not worth much, but it's rare. Lu Dongjiang's eyes lit up. He took the box and laughed. Your Highness is very considerate. From the Great Feng Dynasty to the Spring and Autumn Southern Tang Dynasty, the purple and green alls in Julin County of Feng Province were tributes. The law clearly states that the annual tribute is 5 taels of green alls and 4 taels of purple alls. The purple alls are the most precious. Unfortunately, after the fall of the old Southern Tang Dynasty, the war affected Julin County and almost no grass grew. This kind of small purple all really became extinct. It is said that even the imperial study in Tai and city only has 2 or 3 small purple alls, and they are reluctant to use them. Your Highness, to tell you the truth, I have been searching in Qingzhou for more than 10 years in my early years, but I still couldn't find it. Fortunately. The young king smiled and said, this can be considered a lucky hit. Lu Dongjiang came in high spirits and returned in high spirits. The children of the Lu family must also be honored. Just when the young king got up to send them out of the study, Lu Qinghe suddenly stopped and turned around and asked, I heard that when your highness was still his royal highness, you once wrote the poem, 1,000 Sounds of Rain Hitting the Banana Leaves, 10,000 Koi Fish? Su Fengnian nodded and smiled. It's true. Lu Dongjiang knew something was wrong, but before the deputy provincial governor could say anything to stop him, Lu Qinghe, who was like an all-out-of-a-bag, said bluntly, Wang Ye's original intention is to use this to belittle the fake wealth of the famous Jiangnan scholar Han Jiajing, right? Su Fengnian's smile did not diminish as he nodded lightly. Lu Dongjiang, who was holding the brocade box, had already resigned himself to fate. In fact, deep in his heart he was also looking forward to a lucky hit. Lu Qinghe said bluntly, but your highness's words are tantamount to the pot calling the kettle black. The wealth poem made of golden words is naturally not real wealth. But your highness's koi fish in tide listening lake, Wutangen's 1,000 banana leaves, and my poem, a light breeze flipping through a book in a small room, the hanging lantern in a tall building melts the moon, how about it? Su Fengnian smiled even more. It's easy to judge who's better. In fact, my second sister also scolded me fiercely like you, saying that I'm not as good as the old man surnamed Han. Suddenly I'm rich and I don't even have Han Jiajing's subtle skill of putting up a facade. This time Lu Qinghe was speechless. He really didn't expect that the young king would expose his own shortcomings like this, and the beautiful draft in his stomach suddenly became useless. Su Fengnian asked with a smile, You are Lu Gaobiao Lu Qinghe who said, I'd rather be a ghost of Qingzhou than a dog of Baoyang, right? Your sister once mentioned you to me in Wutangen, saying that you're too talented. Lu Dongjiang tried to smooth things over. Your highness, this kid has some talent, but he doesn't deserve the word, talented. Su Fengnian smiled but didn't say anything. In addition to the satisfied Lu Dongjiang, the group of young people once again respectfully bowed and said goodbye. Lu Qingqing was still walking at the end of the group. For some reason, this nobody from the fourth branch suddenly turned his head and saw the young lord looking at him with a smile. At the same time, the young lord gently threw a small object to him. Lu Qingqing subconsciously reached out and caught the cold object that looked like a seal. After holding it in the palm of his hand, his face was blank. The young king smiled and winked at him, then turned and walked into the study. Lu Qingqing, who was sweating profusely, tried to keep calm and continued to walk slowly. He slightly loosened his hand and looked down. Sure enough, it was a small private seal made of mutton fat white jade. The one in the palm of Lu Qingqing's hand was a seal of appreciation. This kind of seal was used to seal paintings and cultural relics. It was popular in the Dafeng dynasty and flourished in the spring and autumn Nine Kingdoms. The word fake was engraved on the seal. This private seal was definitely the most legendary seal of appreciation. It was very likely that it would not be surpassed even after hundreds of years. The priceless paintings and paintings in the world, which were destined to be passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years, were all engraved with these two words. Lu Qingqing looked absent-minded and lost. He couldn't figure out why the young king would throw such a significant object to him. He couldn't figure out why he didn't give it to the shrewd Lu Qingsong, the sharp Lu Qinghe, or even the head of the Lu family, Lu Dongjiang. Su Fengnian sat back at the table and smiled. For the young man, Lu Qinghe's pretense of being noble, he only regarded it as a joke. Lu Qingyan did mention this cousin, but it was not because he was too talented, but because he was full of depression like a resentful woman. It could be seen that Lu Qingyan didn't have a good impression of Lu Qinghe. But Lu Qingyan, who could be indifferent to her father Lu Dongjiang, was very optimistic about her unknown cousin Lu Qingqing. At that time, she seriously told Su Fengnian that although her grandfather had never shown any sign of appreciation for Lu Qingqing, he had personally commented on her twice. The first was that a family of elms is useless, but a sandalwood knows nothing. The elms meant that everyone in the Lu family was mediocre, and the sandalwood meant that the fourth house's younger brother Lu Qingqing. The second was that he has the talent and insight of a provincial governor in troubled times and the character of a minister of peace. As the leader of the Green Party, Lu Feiqi was obviously full of expectations for the future of the collateral descendant Lu Qingqing. The box of 6 small purple awls was actually sent by Lu Qingyan from Wutangen to the manor in North Jebei City. Of course, her original intention was not for Su Fengnian to give to Lu Dongjiang. She purely wanted to leave something for her man, so she secretly hid it and didn't let Su Beiji take it away. As for the world-famous seal of appreciation, Su Fengnian was indeed reluctant to let it go from Mount Qingliang to the Central Plains. But if it was given to Lu Qingqing, there was nothing to be reluctant about. Su Fengnian was willing to give it to a scholar instead of an endorser, just like when he bought poems from Beiliang in the past. Su Fengnian also didn't have any utilitarian thoughts. After all, Lu Qingqing was still a piece of unpolished jade that had not been carved yet. Even if Beiliang wanted to use him, they had to win the second battle of Liangmang first. Su Fengnian sat alone in the study and closed his eyes to rest. For some reason he remembered the game with Chancellor Wang and muttered to himself, "Slay the dragon, slay the dragon, slay the dragon," carrying two capitals, not sending the emperor but sending the Central Plains. Chapter 1951. As Murong Baoding's main force split into two, they headed south to Liuya and Fuling. At the same time, Dongzhu's hundreds of thousands of private soldiers were also approaching Huayang Pass. However, Beimang suddenly changed its plan again. Dongzhu's troops did not change their route and continued to attack Huayang Pass. However, Murong Baoding's troops were ordered to continue south and find the two main forces of Beiliang's border cavalry to fight a decisive battle. The task of restraining the two military towns of Liuya and Fuling was handed over to the two Norland dignitaries who had suddenly sped up their advance to the south, Helian Wei, the holder of the Hushi province, and Wang Yong, the holder of the Aquarius province. The Emperor of Beimang was not so naive as to let Murong Baoding's troops face Beiliang's left and right cavalry alone. Southern General Zhong Xintong and Longguan's noble leader Wanyan Jinliang would be Murong Baoding's backup. She probably knew the temperament of the Orange Province's border guard. Other than the imperial edict on the table, there was also a secret edict that was even more cruel and cold-blooded. If you, Murong Baoding, are not willing to make contributions and hesitate in the vast area south of Liuya and Fuling, I will let Zhong Xintong and Wanyan Jinliang go south to kill the enemy for you. Therefore, Murong Baoding, who was previously glad that he did not have to go to Huayang Pass to fight Chu Lushan's border guard, could only lead his troops south with a heavy heart. He could ignore the imperial edict and the emperor's verbal threats. But Murong Baoding definitely did not think that the crown prince's Chieshui army would show mercy to his uncle after meeting his own troops. Moreover, he had heard that the emperor had even given the two iron cavalry units named after Murong and Yelu to his nephew. Extending one's head and withdrawing one's head was the same as withdrawing one's head. The old and crafty Murong Baoding could only choose the lesser of two evils. After all, fighting against the left and right cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass was something many northern Mang generals yearned for even in their dreams. The so-called Northern Liang cavalry's main force had always been these two northwestern border cavalry. There were two reasons why Murong Baoding was slightly relieved. One was that after the first battle, the Longxiang army in Liuzhou took away a considerable number of border army elites from the left and right cavalry units. Chao Wei and Ko Zhenghuai also took some away. The second reason was that the old Marshal He Zhong suddenly withdrew from the left cavalry. At the same time, Li Yanchao led a large group of young and strong lieutenants to the right cavalry. The left cavalry was temporarily leaderless, so the morale of the troops was definitely shaken. Huayang Pass had been heavily besieged by Dongzhu, cutting off their escape route and completely cutting off their connection with the three military towns of Liuya, Fuling and Chongzhong. Chongzhong only had infantrymen guarding it, so it was a dead city. Naturally, they had nothing to worry about. The two towns of Liuya and Fuling were each garrisoned with elite cavalry who were good at long-distance raids. However, they had to face the fierce attacks of Wang Yong and Helian Wei, two famous generals who did not care about casualties. They were like clay bodhisattvas crossing the river. Therefore, it could be said that the defense line outside Liangzhou Pass to the north of the left and right cavalry units had been cut into pieces. After cutting off the connection between the main forces of Beiliang, which was already at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, they naturally nibbled away and ate to their heart's content. They used the heads of Beiliang generals in exchange for the military merit of being conferred the title of Marquis and General. There were very few battles inside and outside the gourd mouth of Yuzhou. Occasionally there would be skirmishes between several hundred cavalry. Compared to the two battlefields in Liangzhou and Liuzhou, where tens of thousands of cavalry would fight at every turn, it was really not a big deal. To the north of Qingtsang City in Liuzhou, after receiving reinforcements from Deputy General Xie Shibian's monk soldiers, Ko Zhenghuai launched the third interception of Huang Songpu's Western Army. For some reason, Ko Jianghuai, who had made the Beimang border army dizzy in 2 large-scale cavalry battles, after receiving reinforcements from Mount Lantuo's monk soldiers, perhaps after combining the cavalry and infantry, Ko Jianghuai's army had already exceeded the limit of its ability. Or perhaps he was wary of Xie Bian, one of the twin jade annulus of Dechu. In the end, this battle was fought in an extremely orthodox manner and also extremely tragic. Ko Jianghuai used Mount Lantuo's monk soldiers as the middle army, forming a common infantry formation of the Central Plains. Su Longxiang and Li Mofen each led a Longxiang army as the 2 wings. The Liuzhou cavalry, which had not reached 10,000 men even after temporary reinforcements, stayed behind the infantry formation as the last remaining force to enter the battlefield. Since Ko Jianghuai adopted an almost passive and conservative stance, Huang Songpu decisively gave up on his original relatively conservative offensive stance, completely switching to a large-scale offensive. On that plain battlefield that was already easy for warhorses to gallop on, the old general ordered the cavalry's front line to be greatly extended, the 3 southern border cavalry troops launching a fierce charge at the same time. It had to be said that in a serious cavalry battle, this allowed the grassland cavalry to display the greatest degree of mobility. Every single northern Mang warhorse's hooves could be said to be filled with the aggressiveness of grasping opportunities with great precision. Xiaxi border army's monk soldiers completely became spectators of the battlefield. Apart from only being a nominal mainstay of the Liuzhou border army, they didn't have the expected effect of repelling horses at all. The grassland cavalry completely turned a blind eye to this firm infantry formation that was brimming with dense spears and cold shields. If not for Ko Jianghuai's Liuzhou border army's decisive attack at the crucial moment, stabilizing the dangerous situation that was already leaning towards northern Mang, Liuzhou border army might have already become a thing of the past after this battle. From beginning to end, Xie Bian's monk soldiers who had rushed from the western regions to the battlefield of Liuzhou not only did not have the effect that they should have, but instead became useless under Ko Jianghuai's command. In a sense, they could even be called a burden. On the battlefield, from the end of the First Battle of Liangmang to the 2 previous interceptions in the north, this was the first time that the Longxiang army had suffered such heavy casualties. A total of 8,000 Bailiang elites had died in battle. This allowed Huang Songpu's southern court main force to finally obtain a small victory that the peace order of Beimang had been waiting for. The southern court was originally filled with worry and sorrow. But suddenly the old general who had been criticized for his 2 defeats suddenly sang praises in unison. He did not hesitate to be named the Qiyang of Liang. The Western Court's Ministry of War and Ministry of Rights both asked the king's tent to speak. This was a great victory that had not been seen in 20 years at the border between the 2 states. Although he did not behead Su Longxiang, Li Mofen, Ko Jianghuai, and Xie Bian, the emperor should still confer the title of Marquis to the victorious general Huang Songpu. In the study of the second hall of the Northern Mansion, Deputy Jidushi Yang Shenxing and the Liangzhou provincial governor visited the young king one after another. The old general's face was heavy, his hands gripping the edge of the chair tightly. He gritted his teeth and said, although there was a statement from Liuzhou beforehand, the death of nearly 10,000 dragon elephant cavalry and the death of 3,000 Liuzhou cavalry is really. The old man seemed to have no idea how to comment on the Battle of Liuzhou, so he stopped talking and shut his mouth. The Battle of Miyun Pass in the western regions, the 2 beautiful interceptions to the north of Qingcang City, and the attack and defense of Linyao and Fengxiang combined to create a great situation for Liuzhou. It was as if Ko Jianghuai had destroyed it overnight. Could it be that the rumors in the mansion were becoming more and more intense? Liuzhou's success was due to Ko Jianghuai and its failure was due to Ko Jianghuai? Baiyu came to the study a little later than Yang Shenxing. At that time he brought out a small and exquisite copper incense burner from somewhere. After greeting the young lord, he was not in a hurry to talk. Instead he stood beside the desk and put down the ancient copper incense burner. However, he was not in a hurry to burn the incense. Instead he strangely ran to the bookshelf and rummaged through it. Finally, he pulled out a secret file that recorded the resume of the Northern Mang's Southern Dynasty's main general that was collected by the Fu Shui Chamber's spies in the early years. Then he lifted up the sutra burner in the copper incense burner and placed it heavily on the book. Only then did he look up at the confused young lord and said with a smile, "Help your highness suppress the fate of old Huang in Northern Mang." Yang Shenxing's face was full of suspicion. Was this the mysterious secret of the Daoist mansion of Longhu Mountain? Was it really useful? Su Fengnian, who understood the root of Taoism, did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why is Mr. White Lotus so naive? Yang Xinxing, who was originally in a better mood, almost vomited blood when he heard the young king expose Bai Yu's background. Chapter 1952. Bai Yu didn't forget to turn the copper cauldron slightly, straightening it out. He smiled and said, "Your Highness, it's better to believe it than not to believe it. Sincerity can move metal and stone. Sincerity will work." Su Fengnian could only agree helplessly. Yes, Mr. White Lotus is right. Yang Xinxing looked at this pair of strange monarch and minister, who were neither superior nor inferior. The old man could not help but smile. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, "How is Zhao Ningxin's cultivation after living in seclusion in the Earth Long Mountain? Is it smooth?" Bai Yu smiled and said, "Thanks to your Highness, Zhao Go of Liyang did not have any qi refinement warriors prying into the secrets of heaven. He focused on cultivating at the Earth Long Mountain and did not get discovered. Everything went smoothly, and he even sent a letter to me, advising me to go there to cultivate my heart and mind, lest I have to live under someone else's roof in northern Liang." Su Fengnian was so angry that he laughed and said, "Zhao Ningxin's ability to burn the bridge after crossing the river is not worse than his Dao cultivation. In the future, all the letters sent to you from outside Beiliang will be rejected in Beiliang." Bai Yu quickly waved his hand and said, "You can't do that. Occasionally, I still receive a few letters from female pilgrims and I have to reply to them one by one. It's just that I find it strange. Why are all the letters asking about my relationship with His Highness? Can I ask His Highness for a few pieces of calligraphy on their behalf? They even talk about how their nieces are in the prime of their youth and how virtuous they are. It's really hard to understand what they're saying. It's very disappointing." Su Fengnian took a deep breath and looked out of the window. He softly said, "Jia, don't forget that you're about to receive the gift from Shishu. So Mr. White Lotus's words should not be spread to the four halls, right?" A head gently squeezed open the window and her chin rested on the window frame. The girl opened her eyes wide and looked like she was bargaining with him. Su Fengnian said, "Take a guess." The young girl chuckled and disappeared. Su Fengnian's face was filled with grief and indignation. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. After Mr. White Lotus's jesting and Jia's flaunting, the heavy atmosphere in the study relaxed a little. By the time Miss Hehe ran to the fourth hall to complain, Su Fengnian restrained his expression and said to Yang Xinxing in a deep voice, "Liuzhou has already launched 3 interceptions. In his secret letter, Ko Jianghuai did not mention in detail how the 4th battle will be fought. He only mentioned that he wants to borrow the entire Qingyuan army's defensive line. What do you think?" Yang Xinxing frowned and said, "Your Highness, are you sure it's the entire defensive line and not just the regular garrison in Qingyuan army town?" Su Fengnian nodded. "Including Liangzhou's General Shifu's troops, Ningamei's Iron Stupa, and Yuan Nanting's White Feather Light Cavalry." Yang Xinxing fell into deep thought and muttered, "This Ko Jianghuai, what a big appetite." Then Yang Xinxing cautiously asked, as a general of Liuzhou, to ask for power from Liangzhou's border army, and to ask for tens of thousands of elite troops at once. Not only will he empty out Liangzhou's Shimen whose family fortune, but he will also subtly surpass the higher-ranking Liangzhou general. Isn't this a little inappropriate? Without waiting for Su Fengnian to reply, Bai Yu had already answered this sensitive question. "General Yang, if this were anywhere else, it would naturally be greatly inappropriate. But here there's no need to scare yourself. Shifu won't hold a grudge against this. Of course, the premise is that we win the battle. If we lose, Shifu will never have any contact with Ko Jianghuai for the rest of his life. Even worse, the 2 border armies of Liangzhou and Liuzhou might become enemies from then on." Yang Xinxing asked, "Why is General Ko unwilling to give his general military strategy to Beifeng City?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I don't know." Yang Xinxing flew into a rage and slammed his palm on the edge of his chair. This Ko Jianghuai is truly audacious. How can he treat a matter of national security so lightly? Su Fengnian didn't bat an eyelid. After hesitating for a moment, he rubbed his forehead and said self-mockingly, "You can lose a battle but you can't vent your anger. This has always been the rule of my Beiliang cavalry. Since I personally pushed Ko Jianghuai to the position of Liuzhou's commander, I have to help him clean up this mess." Xianxia asked tentatively, "Why don't you reconsider?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Forget it. Go back to the barracks and write 3 secret letters to Shifu, Ningame and Yuan Nanting. There's no need to explain the reason for the transfer of troops in the letters. After you've finished writing them, send them here and I'll stamp them with my seal." Yang Xinxing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He stood up and strode away. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at Bai Yu and asked with a smile, "Then as for the letter to Ko Jianghuai, should I personally write it or should I trouble Master Bai Lian?" Bai Yu blinked his eyes as if he didn't understand. Su Fengnian said unhappily, "Don't play dumb with me. I don't know the depth of your relationship with Yang Xinxing and Ko Jianghuai, but the two of you came here together today, one playing the good cop, the other playing the bad cop. I'm not a fool. How can I not guess that Ko Jianghuai has boarded your ship?" Bai Yu said seriously, "A local general colluding with an important minister of the imperial court to obtain military power. Even if it's not enough to warrant the death penalty, he should at least lose his position, right?" Su Fengnian glared at him and said, "Again?" Bai Yu laughed loudly. "I'll write a letter to Ko Jianghuai right now, saying that your highness has agreed to all of his requests. However, if that Ko Jianghuai doesn't make up for his losses in the 4th battle with interest, then he'll have to be lighter by 10 caddies." Su Fengnian was puzzled. "What do you mean lighter by 10 caddies?" Bai Yu stretched out 2 fingers and tapped his neck. "I don't have a head." Su Fengnian was first enlightened, then he slammed the table. "Bai Yu, what nonsense are you spouting? If you're not giving Ko Jianghuai a way out, then what are you trying to do? When that Ko Jianghuai loses, he can just take off his helmet and armor and he'll still be lighter by 10 caddies. How am I supposed to reason with him?" Bai Yu said with an aggrieved expression, "Your Highness, you're gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain." Su Fengnian waved his hand with a straight face. "Get out of here, I'll write this letter myself." Bai Yu swaggered out of the study room and said, "I can save a few hundred words of writing a letter, now I can read a few more pages of miscellaneous books." That's great, that's great." The young vassal Jia chuckled. "I originally kept 2 small purple alls and wanted to give it to someone. Now that I think about it, I'll give it up." "That's great." Mr. White Lotus, who was once praised by the late Emperor of Liang as, "I thought he was an immortal when I first saw him," quickly turned around and ran to the desk with a bright smile on his face. He squinted his eyes and looked around. "Where is it? Take it out. I've said it before, the purple alls that are most suitable for small characters were given to Lu Kuobo, who is good at writing big characters. It's really a waste of God's gift, a waste of God's gift, a waste of God's gift." Then the young vassal said with a smirk, "You really believe it? That box of small purple alls, I'll give them all to my father-in-law." Bai Yu stiffly turned around as if he was struck by lightning. When he stepped over the threshold, he raised his arm high and pointed his middle finger. Just when Mr. White Lotus was about to step over the threshold, he heard a wicked laugh behind him. "Here, 2 small purple alls, take them." Bai Yu stopped but did not immediately turn around. He was in a dilemma. In the end, Mr. White Lotus gritted his teeth and continued to move forward. He felt that the young vassal was most likely bluffing. He must not continue to be deceived. Sure enough, when Bai Yu left the corridor and walked down the stairs, Su Fengnian did not ask him to stay. Bai Yu walked all the way to the door of the yamen, but he vaguely saw the girl who came and went the most freely in the yamen. She walked towards him and gave him 2 slender long brocade boxes. She said indifferently, "He gave them to you." At that moment Bai Yu said that he was not touched. Mr. White Lotus sighed and went back to his seat in the study room. He had mixed feelings. After he came back to his senses, he gently opened the small brocade box, carefully picked up the brush and stared at it. He was instantly stunned. "Damn it, what kind of small purple alls are they? They are clearly ordinary sheep's hair brush." After a long time of being stunned, Bai Yu inexplicably held his belly and laughed. Everyone in the room was stunned. Only Bai Yu felt that it was really good. After he put down the sheep's hair brush, Bai Yu, who had weak vision, opened his eyes and looked outside the room. It was just a blur. Mr. White Lotus slowly said, "One day all the sheep's hair brushes of the Central Plains will be out of the grassland." Chapter 1953. Grand cities have their own prosperity, remote small towns also have their own liveliness. This small town located in the southeast of Liang has always been far away from the flames of war. If it was a time of peace, it would not be a big deal. But when there were signs of turmoil and unrest in the provinces and counties, this place appeared particularly peaceful. There were some villages near this small town that were named after surnames. When it came time to pay respects to their ancestors and hang up paintings, they were all extraordinary. The Song village even had a portrait of an emperor surnamed Song. Compared to some villages that had portraits of the founding heroes of Dafeng dynasty or the ministers of Small Spring and Autumn dynasty, this village naturally felt superior. It's just that this Song village's ancestor was of high status. The few families surnamed Wen in the village could not benefit from this glory. In fact, the elders in the village, even if they had studied for a few days, even if they had carefully flipped through the family tree, they still could not tell what was the relationship between themselves and the Song emperor. It was said that there was once a busybody in the village who specially brought along a small wooden box to examine the family tree, but he also could not tell what was the reason. Who would have thought that in the end, it turned out to be the most unambitious young man in the village, a guy surnamed Wen. He went out for a stroll for 3 years and then returned to his hometown. He spoke with certainty, saying that after the people in the village died, there was a great deal of attention to the reason why the 2 words Yinchuan were engraved on the top of the tombstones. At that time, the Dafeng dynasty claimed that half of the scholars came from Yinchuan County, and the Yinchuan Song family was a first-class rich family that produced many literary and famous scholars. In the last years of the Dafeng dynasty, the ancestor who first set up a separatist regime and then became the first emperor of the Song family, came from a branch of the Yinchuan Song family. The origin of this Song village must be that after the separatist regime was annihilated, during the famous Ganlu southward migration, they finally settled down here. After the young man with the surname Wen sorted out the context, the elders in the village more or less understood. Even if they did not understand, they pretended to understand. Just listen, not only is it the Song family of Yinchuan, but it is also the Sweet Du South. How grand is this? It can be seen that although our Song family village has not produced a single child in the past 100 years, but after all, our ancestors were once rich and noble. Moreover, it must be that the fortune of our ancestors was too great a few hundred years ago, so the descendants of the later generations had no choice but to be content with their lot. The young man surnamed Wen was originally not well liked in the village. Unexpectedly, after he returned to his hometown with a lame leg and was in dire straits, it was as if he had become a completely different person. Not only did he not have the sloppy appearance of carrying a wooden sword at his side, but he also did odd jobs in the small town's restaurant. Not only did he rely on his elder brother and sister-in-law to support him, he could even send money home. What was even more unexpected was that the young man had married a virtuous and moving wife. Previously, they had held a banquet in the open space outside the village's ancestral hall. That young woman made many young men surnamed Song, regardless of whether they were married or not, stare at her. After the young man surnamed Wen married his wife, he no longer stayed in the restaurant's miscellaneous room. He saved some money and rented a small courtyard in the small town. There were 3 rooms. Excluding the wedding room whose windows were covered with red festive paper cuts, a small room was used to store sundries, and the remaining room was not empty. The bedding was brand new, it was clean and spotless by the woman who kept the house. This was because her husband had said that in the future, perhaps his brothers would come to their house as guests. No matter what, they had to have a place to stay. Otherwise it would be too improper. Moreover, to let his friends fork out money to stay in an inn or a restaurant was not only seen as an outsider, it was also wasteful and not particular. She went along with him and felt that this was reasonable in her heart. Although her family was not well off now, she who came from a small family could only be considered well off. But in fact she was a woman with a generous mind. In the beginning, when she insisted on marrying him, no one in her family was willing to agree. They did not even give her a dowry. She also gritted her teeth and did not ask for anything from her parents. Fortunately, time revealed a person's heart. Now she wanted to bring him back to her maternal home. Although her parents would still give her some face, several of her elder brothers had more or less untied the knot in their hearts. They knew that their father could not bring himself to do that, and it was inconvenient for him to drink with that brother-in-law of his at the dining table at home. However, each of them secretly went to her courtyard and did not forget to bring wine and meat. They were already like a family. She knew that when she had a child and her parents had grandchildren at that time, they would find a way to step down and completely forget about him. However, no matter how small the town was, the expenses were not small. Relying on the man to earn a living as a waiter in a restaurant, the two of them could still be considered well off. But once there was a third little mouth in the family, it would be hard to say. Fortunately, her needlework skills were well known. One of her sisters opened a cloth shop, and those exquisite little things that she sewed were placed on the counter to add to the customers who bought cloth. The shop's business also improved by 2 or 3 points. Therefore, in this month she was able to earn 2 or 3 taels of silver. Unexpectedly, she was not much worse off than the man who was the head of the household. These 2 days the town was bustling with activity. Before and after the summer heat, the Hungry Ghost Festival had been a custom in the southeast area of Liyang since ancient times. There were also some activities to worship the ancestors and welcome the autumn. Although the Hungry Ghost Festival was called the Ghost Festival in their dialect, it was said that the King of Hell was merciful and specially opened the Ghost Gate during this period of time to let the deceased return to their hometown to see their descendants in the world of the living. In fact, it only sounded a little scary, but adults and children did not avoid it. They only felt that it was something that could be enjoyed. Monks and Taoist priests would begin to give alms to the poor. Ordinary people would also erect lanterns and light up river lanterns. Especially young children who could be in the arms of their parents, tiptoe on the bridge railings, or lie on the bluestone slabs of the river bank. Their eyes were filled with colorful lotus lanterns, and their hearts were filled with joy. It was no less than the Mid-Autumn Festival when they could eat mooncakes. Yesterday he went to the village to pick up his nephew. He planned to let his wife take the child shopping. Coincidentally, his wife was clever and skillful with her hands. She made 2 large bamboo baskets of river lanterns and wanted to sell them by the bridge. He believed that with her craftsmanship, they would soon be snatched up by the customers who went out for a night trip. He had seen her weaving lanterns in the courtyard before. There were many kinds of lanterns: flowers, birds, fish, insects, lotuses, turtles, cranes, dragons, and phoenixes. He really did not know how there could be such a skillful pair of hands in the world, so he sat on the bench to cool off. In any case, he could not help, and even if he helped, he would only be more of a hindrance. He could only be secretly happy. After his scholarly nephew arrived in the small town, he was a little reserved at first. During the day he would first bring him to the restaurant and obediently listen to the storytellers in the corner. He listened with great interest. The child's temperament was like his father's, introverted and honest, and did not speak much. As the uncle he liked but was also worried. He liked the child's honest temperament, but was worried that if he was too honest he would easily be taken advantage of when he grew up. The restaurant that the waiter surnamed Wen worked in was now considered a famous place in the small town. Although most of the restaurants in the town had hired storytellers to tell stories of Jianghu, only their restaurant always told the freshest and most novel stories. All of this was naturally due to him. Earlier on, it was he who successfully persuaded the restaurant's manager to not be stingy with the storyteller's travel expenses to the county or even the provincial capital. Therefore, when this restaurant first told the story of the female Wuling chief of Great Snow Plateau who comprehended immortality by watching snow for a night, the debate between Buddhism and Taoism on Mount Wudong in the northwest Taoist ancestral court, the turmoil and unforeseen events in the Holy Land of Jianghu, and the Wu family's sword tomb's journey to Beiliang, it could be said to be a sensation in the small town. The people were led by the nose by the restaurant's storyteller during their leisure time, and the restaurant's business naturally rose. However, the waiter surnamed Wen, who deserved the title of the #1 hero, secretly paid for the storyteller's first travel expenses to the county capital. He had never asked the restaurant's manager for a dividend. Other than the copper coins that the restaurant's customers tipped him after they drank too much, the restaurant's pay for him was still the same as it was on the first day he entered the restaurant. There was not a single copper coin increase. Every day the shopkeeper would stand behind the counter with a smile on his face, watching the waiter with the surname when running errands attentively, and watching the lively young man serving tea, wine, and smiling apologetically every day. No one knew what this old man was thinking. Today the storyteller in the restaurant was in high spirits, his spittle flying everywhere as he talked about a strange incident. He said that there was a grand master of swordsmanship named Qi Jiajie in the capital of Liyang. As the master of swordsmanship for many of the sons and grandsons of aristocratic families in Tyne City, for some reason he went to the Dongyue sword pool with high mountains, long rivers, and high sword qi to forge a peerless sword. Then Jia went to the foot of the Wudong Mountain in Beiliang first, a small town that was not much more famous than the one they were in. His flying sword arrived later, crossing thousands of miles in one go, and he thrust his sword at the young king with a different surname who was in charge of the northwest border. It shocked the heaven and earth and made ghosts and gods cry. The sea of clouds opened up for thousands of miles, and the sword Qi reached into the sky. Unexpectedly, the young king was even more amazing. He rose from the ground and stood proudly on the sea of clouds that bordered the border between Beiliang Road and Lianhuai Road. He actually blocked the flying sword that had the power to kill immortals. The storyteller talked endlessly. When he got to the part where he talked to his heart's content, even the old man himself was dumbfounded, not to mention the listeners who were drinking and eating in the restaurant. They were all speechless and stopped drinking and their minds were shaken. When they came back to their senses, the story was not over yet and they had not heard the most annoying sentence. Listen to the next part of the story. Of course, they had to ask the restaurant for 1 or 2 more pots of wine. The waiter's nephew, whose surname was Wen, was listening to a storyteller for the first time, and it was also the first time he heard about Jianghu people. He was even more dumbfounded, as if he was listening to a book from heaven. He sat on the small stool in the corner that his uncle brought for him, clenched his fists, pricked up his ears and widened his eyes. He felt that listening to Jianghu stories was more interesting than reading the books of sages. Chapter 1954. Stories always come to an end, and so do restaurants. When the storyteller's story came to an end, it was already night outside, and the restaurant was about to close for the day. The owner of the restaurant, who had made a lot of money, was in a good mood today. He asked the cook to prepare a special meal and called the waiter and his nephew to the table for a good meal. This made the inexperienced child overjoyed. However, he was a little scholar who had studied in a private school. When he ate, he sat upright and still. No matter how greedy he was, he did not move his chopsticks quickly. On the table there were fish and meat that could only be eaten during festivals, so the child did not dare to eat too much. However, the owner of the restaurant smiled and helped the child to fill his bowl. The child was a little embarrassed and looked timidly at his uncle. The waiter smiled and said, "Eat as much as you want. Your grandpa is a great philanthropist in town and is very generous." The child smiled shyly at the owner and the old man laughed. He poured a cup of wine for himself and the waiter and pointed to the second floor with his chopsticks. He told the well-behaved child to come to the restaurant often in the future. The next time you listen to a storyteller, Grandpa will help you find a seat next to the railings on the second floor. The old man drank a cup of wine with the waiter and joked, "This child is not like you, honest and likable." The waiter proudly said, "That's right. His personality is like my brother's and he is very lucky. He is good at studying and may become a scholar in the future." The child seriously retorted, "The teacher said that it would be good if I could pass the exam and become a scholar." The old man, who revered scholars the most all his life, rubbed the child's head and sighed. The county examination, the provincial examination, and the academy examination are all obstacles. Grandpa shopkeeper will leave you with these words. In the future, every time you pass a test, our restaurant will give you a big red packet. If by any chance you pass the examination, whether you are a scholar or a scholar, don't forget to write a plaque for our restaurant and give Grandpa shopkeeper face. The child nodded vigorously and happily said to the old man, "Uncle bought me a lot of paper and pens, but I can't bear to use them now. I still practice writing by dipping a branch in the water by the village stream like before. When I graze the cows, I will also draw on the ground. The teacher said that the clumsy bird flies first and hard work can make up for it. There will be a time when I can write good words, and then I will write a big plaque for Grandpa the owner." Probably because it was rare to drink wine, the waiter's uncle joked, "Studying is good and it will be easy for you to kidnap a wife back home in the future." The nephew, who secretly liked a girl of the same age in the village, immediately blushed and glared at the uncle. The waiter, surnamed Wen, and the manager of the restaurant looked at each other and smiled. After the meal, he asked his nephew to go home first. He still had to help clean up the restaurant. He would meet them at the bridge in town later. The manager of the restaurant looked at the young man who was busy cleaning up the dishes. He drank some wine and said in a slightly drunk tone, "When I took you in, I really didn't expect that there would be such a day. At that time I just felt that you were pitiful. I thought that if you weren't forced into a dead end, you wouldn't have come to this small place of mine to eat and wait for death. Who would have thought that you would help the restaurant make a lot of money? To be honest, this year the restaurant has made more money than the previous 10 years. The young man raised his head and smiled. Good people will be rewarded, shopkeeper. The old man smiled and asked, should be? The young man wondered, shouldn't it be? The old man sighed, good people will be rewarded. A child like your nephew is willing to believe it, but an old man like me doesn't dare to believe it. The old man looked directly at the diligent waiter. The guests who come here to drink, eat, and listen to books all think that you have no temper, but I don't think so. I always think that you, the young man joked. Shopkeeper, you want to say that I have no future, right? The old man laughed and scolded. Nonsense, I really don't know why your wife likes you. The young man pointed at his face and said with a smile, my parents gave birth to me to be handsome, shopkeeper. You really can't be envious. The old man waved his hand. I won't talk nonsense with you. I want to talk to you about something serious today. The young man stopped smiling and stood beside the table with his hands behind his back. Shopkeeper, if there's anything, just say it. I Wenhua have no future, but I remember who is good to me. I don't dare to say that I will repay the kindness of a drop of water, and I don't have the ability to return the favor, but I have to return the favor. Even if I can't repay it all once, I Wenhua will repay it all in my life. So shopkeeper, don't be polite with me. Shopkeeper, if you weren't willing to take me in, I might be chopping firewood or burning charcoal somewhere, or working as a part-time worker for some family. Not to mention marrying a wife. I can barely support myself and not starve to death. Even saving money to buy a pen and paper for my nephew would be difficult. The old man smiled and raised his head to stare at the young man with sincere eyes. He put down the wine cup in his hand. Most of the restaurant's business can be handled by you alone. As a shopkeeper, I am very idle every day, so I have heard the stories of the Jianghu that the storyteller told me, or the stories of scholars and beauties, and the strange tales of wild foxes. I have heard some of them, but there are a few sentences that I have remembered in my heart. There is a sentence that probably no one cares about, but I am very concerned about it. It's called, it's hard to be honest since ancient times. The more I think about it, the more I find this to be the truth. So later on, I am relieved to let you handle the business of this restaurant. At first, I was actually not without concerns, and I did intend to see if you would keep some for yourself. After all, the big business in the world is accumulated piece by piece. But I was very surprised that you didn't take a single copper coin from the beginning to the end. The account books are clear, and the account books are also clean. This is not easy. Wine reddens one's face and wealth moves one's heart. This is human nature. So you are an honest person. The young man said in a deep voice, Shopkeeper, you are treating me as an outsider. I, Wenhua, can live a stable life today because of the shopkeeper's kindness. If I go against my conscience and secretly take money from the restaurant, I, Wenhua, am really not a good person. I can't do this kind of thing. The old man nodded. As you know, I'm not young anymore. My whole life, I've always wanted to buy a big house in the county city for my retirement. It just so happens that my 2 pairs of daughter and son-in-law are both making a living there. Although there's an old saying that a married daughter is like spilled water, there's no parents in the world who don't care about their children. My 2 daughters are married off carelessly, and it's not easy for them to live in the county city. That's why I'm thinking of letting them live a better life without renting a house and living under someone else's roof. As for me, I was willing but unable to do so in the past. The 300 to 400 taels of silver that I've saved up are still passable in the county city, but it's not enough in the county city where every inch of land is worth its weight in gold. This year, thanks to you, Wenhua, I've doubled my savings and have about 800 taels of silver. As long as it's not a place where the rich and powerful like Green Rabbit Alley or Children's Alley, it's more or less enough to buy a decent house. The waiter was stunned and said with a wry smile, Old shopkeeper, I can't afford such a big restaurant even if I sell everything I have. The old man said with a smile, This restaurant used to be worth about 180 taels of silver. Now it is different from the past. It should be valued at 300 or 400 taels of silver. You know this in your heart, and of course I know it better. As for how much savings you have, I know it better. So I thought of a compromise. The restaurant will be converted to 300 taels of silver. You don't have to rush to pay this money. Just don't forget about the dividends in the future. But let me say the ugly words first. After paying off the 300 taels of silver, if the restaurant still makes money in the future, I, as an old shopkeeper, still want you to be filial to me every year. As for the specific amount, I won't force you. You can do as you see fit. In short, take care of your family first. The young man wanted to say something but stopped. The old man waved his hand to signal the young man to sit down. Don't feel like you owe me. I am very smart. I know that you will definitely make the restaurant business bigger and bigger in the future. With your kindness, how can the dividends be small every year? I can lie in the big house in the county city and enjoy life. I can get a sum of silver every year for free and make a fortune. Chapter 1955. The young man sat back on the bench and straightened his back. Old shopkeeper, I can't thank you enough for your kindness. The old man twirled his fingers and joked, don't just say that. You'll speak with money in the future. The young man suddenly laughed. Old shopkeeper, aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word in the future and refuse to pay the dividends after paying back the 300 taels of silver? The old man raised his eyebrows. After that, he pointed at the young man's chest and his own eyes. The reason for this deal is that I believe in your conscience and my own eyesight. The young man and the old shopkeeper each poured a cup of wine and raised their cups. It's all in the wine. The two drank the wine in one gulp. After the old man finished his wine, he said, you should go and see your wife. Oh right, go to the back of the cabinet and get a jug of green ant wine. Treat it as my celebration for you finally having your own business. The young man stood up and laughed. Sure. The old man reminded him, celebration is one thing but the wine will be on your tab. This green ant wine is not cheap. It's said that a jug from Bailiang costs less than 2 taels of silver. In Lianhuai it costs more than 1 tael of silver. And from Gangnam-do to here it costs 4 taels of silver. How is this selling wine? It's more like selling silver. You should drink slowly. Don't drink until you've drunk all the wine. The young man chuckled. I can't bear to drink it myself. The old man asked curiously, why? Are you giving it to your brother or your father-in-law? The young man who went straight to the counter suddenly paused, turned around and grinned. Neither. I'm saving it for my brother. In the future when he comes to my house to eat and drink, I'll treat him with this wine. Back then, a long time ago when I was hanging out with him, he always said that this green ant wine was the most delicious wine in the world. At that time he always liked to use this wine to covet me. Later we separated. There was one time when I passed by his hometown alone. I was in a hurry and didn't get to drink it. I don't know what it tastes like. The old man said unhappily, what tastes like? It's just that it's expensive. Other than that, I don't like to drink it. It's too strong and too strong. It burns through the throat and has a strong after effect. In my opinion, it's not as good as our home-brewed rice wine. The young man smiled and said, that brother of mine is half a Jianghu man. Riding a horse to drink wine, he naturally has to drink the strongest wine. Drinking that soft rice wine is not considered a hero. The old man was amused. Oh, so you're from the pugilistic world. Also, from what you've said, you've traveled quite far in the pugilistic world, haven't you? The young man scratched his head. It's just that I've gone far. The old man rolled his eyes. You've suffered before, haven't you? The young man laughed it off. The old man sitting alone at the table raised his cup and drank slowly. He looked at the waiter who was carefully holding the wine pot from afar and asked without any reason, when Hua, the storyteller in our restaurant, said several times that the Northwest vassal king admitted that he had a brother in Jianghu who happened to have the same name as you? Then shouldn't your brother's surname be Su as well? The young man stood in the distance, a brilliant smile on his face. What a coincidence, it really is him. The old man laughed and waved his hand. Brat. Get lost. The old man who had no wine in his cup shook the wine pot. It was empty. He turned his head and looked at the young man who was walking towards the door of the restaurant. The young man was limping, but he didn't give off a miserable or funny feeling. The old man suddenly laughed and asked, Wen Hua, are you really not that famous swordsman in the capital? The young man who was holding the pot of green ant wine slowly turned around and made a face. Shopkeeper, do I look like him? The old man smiled and didn't answer. He waved his hand again. The old shopkeeper returned to his seat. There was no more wine in the pot. The bored old man thought for a while and looked at the door. He laughed at himself and said, You don't look like him. That's right. Can you look like him? After the young man left the restaurant, he quickly walked towards the small bridge. Along the way there was an endless stream of people on both sides of the river. As far as the eye could see, the quiet river was full of lit river lanterns. It was like a starry sky on a summer night. According to local folklore, after a person died, If those wandering ghosts could find the river lantern with their name on it on the day of the Hungry Ghost Festival, they could be reincarnated. Back then he had heard from his brother who was a dog in Jianghu, that there was a Buddhist saying about reincarnation through a lantern. Especially for the resentful ghosts who couldn't be free in the netherworld, they could be free by relying on the lotus lantern on the river in the world of the living. One of his regrets in this life was that he and his brother could only afford for one of them to study. His brother gave him the opportunity, but he didn't like to study and didn't know how to cherish it. He only thought about doing chivalrous deeds all day long and yearned for the Jianghu where blades flashed and swords flashed. Therefore he liked to nag his nephew even more than his brother and sister-in-law, telling him to study hard. The paper and brush he bought for his nephew were the most expensive and the best in town. He didn't hope that his nephew would pass the imperial examinations and become a scholar, nor did he want to bring honor to his family. Instead he felt from the bottom of his heart that if a man studied hard, had a belly full of knowledge and could write good characters, he wouldn't need to ask others for couplets every year. In other words, if he had a child in the future he could go to the books and name his child. When it came to swordsmanship, there was only one person in the world who wanted to become the best in the world. When it came to fists, there would always be martial arts experts in Jianghu whose fists were harder. However, the principles that scholars read from books were definitely not the principles that emperors, kings, generals, ministers, high officials and dignitaries spoke out. They would definitely be a bit more important. When he arrived at the familiar Bluestone Bridge, his wife had already sold 2 baskets of river lanterns. His nephew was holding the last one in his hand. She waited until he came closer before softly asking, "Why do you want me to leave one? Do you still want to write the 2 words Baoyang?" He smiled and said, "The young man I told you about is from Baoyang. Now that there's a war in the west, I want to pray for him." The 3 of them walked down the bridge together and came to the shore. He bent down and gently placed the river lantern into the river. The 3 of them sat side by side on the shore. He rubbed his nephew's head and asked him to help hold the bottle of green ant wine. He looked up and smiled at his wife. "If you have the chance to meet him in the future, don't agree to it if he calls you sister-in-law. He must call you sister-in-law." Her eyes curved as she smiled mischievously. "You two are also fighting over this kind of thing." He smiled happily. "We don't have to fight over other things, but we can't give in on this matter." She blushed slightly and said helplessly, "Then you still want to become in-laws with him in the future? You said that he agreed to your marriage when you were a child?" He said boldly, "Does he dare to not agree?" His wife smiled. She didn't know why her man didn't care about anything. Only when he talked about his brother would he be especially proud. Sometimes she even felt a little jealous. She didn't know what her man and his brother went through together that made him so reluctant to let it go. She knew better than anyone that this man with the surname Wen and given name Hua was actually able to take on and let go of anything. He even let go of the face that a man should care about the most. He looked at the river and said softly, "Wife, don't worry. I'm not thinking about the Jianghu that I went through back then. I'm just thinking about my brother." He then turned his head and grinned. "I can't help it. I know that without me in the Jianghu, no matter how well he does, he'll feel that it's meaningless." "Look, listen, it's that tone again." She rolled her eyes at him. He snorted. "Wife, don't believe me. Who am I? Who is my brother? When we went through the Jianghu back then it was..." Suddenly he saw his wife looking at him with a playful smile. He immediately changed his words. It was definitely filled with righteousness. "Yes, of course, it was just that we were a little miserable. We were full for 1 meal and hungry for 3. She pursed her lips and smiled. He lowered his head and said to his nephew, "That cheap uncle of yours always likes to recite a poem. I'll tell you. Have you seen it in a book before? The sun rises 10 feet high in Fusang. Everything in the world is as thin as a feather. A wild man sees injustice and anger and tears the ancient knife in his chest." The child who had just started learning in the village was naturally confused. He shook his head vigorously. He raised his head again and stared at the bright river with lanterns floating on the water surface. The cool breeze brushed his face and his expression was calm. He seemed to be talking to himself. "I'll keep the green ant wine for you and empty the house for you. Xianxia, if you still treat me as a brother, don't die outside Liangzhou Pass." Chapter 1956. If one looked closely at the map of Liang, one would find that Bailiang Road was like a narrow knife, and Beimang's border to the south of Gusai and north of Liangzhou was like a millstone. This vast battlefield was like a whetstone, and in the end the Bailiang cavalry was the best in the world. Murong Baoding's vanguard cavalry split into two groups. The 30,000 Winter Thunder elite cavalry went straight for the left cavalry, while the 30,000 Ruren cavalry went straight for the right cavalry. This Baimang royal family member, who was also the governor of Juzi province, personally took charge of the middle infantry and did not put himself in danger. Aquarius province's disciplinary magistrate Wang Yong and Hushi province's disciplinary magistrate Helian Wei, after they surrounded Fuling and Liuya, these two towns, they similarly sent 20 to 30,000 cavalry south to reinforce the Winter Thunder elite cavalry and Ruren cavalry. Murong Baoding's intentions of being in charge of northern Liang's border cavalry was completely undisguised, but this was undoubtedly an open and above-board scheme. The northern Mang emperor and the peace magistrate precisely wanted to use Murong Baoding's two elite troops to tie down the left and right cavalry outside northern Liang Pass. They wanted to draw the snake out of its hole, have the two cavalry forces pull apart the distance between northern Liang City and northern Liang Pass, while also stopping the left and right cavalry forces from providing support to Huayang Pass defensive line. In short, northern Mang wanted these two northern Liang field forces to be consumed between northern Liang City and Huayang Pass. Even though northern Mang's intentions were extremely clear, after the young vassal king and the various generals and elders discussed this, the northern city's discussion hall didn't shrink back in the slightest. From start to finish, no one asked if these two battles were going to be fought or not, instead discussing how to fight them. The commander of the right cavalry, Jean Partridge Shou Kong, stayed in the meeting hall in the end. He probably still had some matters to discuss with the young king. The deputy commander of the left cavalry, Lu Diyuan, and the second commander of the right cavalry, Li Yanchao, who were about the same age, just happened to cross the threshold side by side. Li Yanchao was not familiar with Lu Diyuan, who came out of nowhere. The youngest deputy commander in the history of the Manchu battalion, the old corporal of Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao, and the old soldier of the Su family who was on the same level as Su Pu Wuqi and Lu Jinyu. Li Yanchao did not care about Li Yanchao, who only cared about military achievements. Moreover, it was very interesting. As a young general who rose to prominence in the border army during the time when Chen Zhibao was the first protector general of Bailiang, Li Yanchao and the other captains who joined the right cavalry, compared to the old Su family generals who rose to prominence in the late spring and autumn period, were very different in character and management. Just like after Lu Diyuan returned to the border army, even though he held the actual military power of the left cavalry, he did not have the official custom of a new official making drastic changes. Usually when he inspected the cavalry, he did not have a straight face. He also turned a deaf ear to Chen Zhibao's strict military rules of Bailiang. If he did not care about it, he would not care about it or discuss military affairs in the meeting hall. He was also not as serious as Li Yanchao. Even when the young king asked him personally, Lu Dian had a lazy expression, as if nothing in the world was a problem. This naturally made Li Yanchao, who was strict in managing the army, displeased him and had no intention of befriending him. Lu Diyuan and Li Yanchao walked side by side to the barracks. There were some specific matters that needed to be discussed with Yang Xinxing. For this kind of large-scale deployment of troops, not only Yang Xinxing, the deputy military governor, but also Bai Yu, the head of the household department, had to participate. Li Yanchao suddenly stopped and took the initiative to say to Lu Diyuan, "Can I have a few words with you?" Lu Diyuan naturally did not refuse. The two did not rush to enter the barracks but walked down the stairs. There was a wooden archway directly opposite the meeting hall and the 6 departments in the east and west wing. There were words on both sides. On the south side, there were 4 golden words on a red background, Northwest, written by the young king himself. On the north side was a Bailiang official maxim written by Li Yishan, "Heaven and earth can be bullied but not the people." When the members of the vassal residence were in charge of military and political affairs, they could see this maxim when they looked up. Lu Diyuan led Li Yanchao to the wooden archway, smiled and went straight to the point. "I know that my position should have been yours, Li Yanchao. If you have any ideas about this, I can't stop you even if I wanted to." Li Yanchao frowned and did not speak. Lu Diyuan, who was wearing armor, raised his arms and rubbed his hands vigorously. The pieces of armor clattered, and this newly appointed deputy commander of the left cavalry, who had ascended to the heavens in one step, gently exhaled. The relationship between the left and right cavalry outside the Great Pass has always been good. Otherwise, we would not have the ability to arm wrestle with the great snow dragon cavalry everywhere. Even the Xinli Ranch and Tianjing Ranch have become our backyard. It is said that in the early years before the Longxiang army had moved to Liuzhou, they had a conflict with the left cavalry over the matter of 200 A-class warhorses. At that time, Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, the two deputy commanders of the Longxiang army, were very fierce. The original commander of the cavalry, Zhong Honggu, could not suppress them. The previous protector general, Chen Zhibao, was not willing to interfere. In the end, it was the right cavalry that sent out 2,000 first-class elite cavalrymen to rush to the left cavalry's camp overnight. It was obvious that they wanted to support old Commander He, who had already decided to take a step back. Only then did they manage to snatch back the two good horses. After so many years, the left and right cavalry has been very united, so they more or less have conflicts with the Longxiang army, the White Feather Light Cavalry and the Iron Stupa. I've heard a saying that the words of the junior captains in charge of the logistics and miscellaneous tasks in the left and right cavalry have more authority than the captains in Beiliang. It is to the extent that the leaders of the four major military towns outside the Great Pass, Liuya, Fuling, Zhongzhong and Qingyuan, are all afraid of the left and right cavalry. Li Yanchao's tone was indifferent. Lu Dun, don't forget that you are now the deputy commander of the left cavalry. If you say these heartfelt words to the prince, it might be useful. But if you say them to me, Li Yanchao, it's meaningless. Lu Dun curled his lips and turned back to look at the meeting hall and the 6 rooms. They were all busy figures with hurried footsteps. He patted the heavy armor on his body and laughed. The Su family that I know was not like this in the past. They were all a bunch of uncouth men, all of them carrying swords, bows and armor. Even the only 2 scholars by the general's side, Sir Li and Sir Zhao, used to carry swords and participate in meetings. Today in the general's residence, Li Gongda, Bai Yu and the others are wearing civil official robes, while the military counselors are wearing scholarly robes. Looking around, there are so many scholars. There are very few people who wear turtle shells like us. Li Yanchao, who still had a lot of matters to deal with personally, said in a low voice, "The war is imminent and the military affairs are heavy. Lu Dun, if you have something to say it directly. Don't beat around the bush with me. I won't play along." Lu Dun nodded, not angry at Li Yanchao's arrogant attitude. He smiled and said, "I, Lu Dun, am a donkey. I haven't been taken out for a walk for nearly 20 years. Since the prince trusts me and has allowed me to sit on the actual first seat of the left cavalry, then I can't let the prince down. Speaking of which, I, Lu Dun, have fought more than 60 battles and have never lost. This time I definitely won't lose. Today I called you out for a chat to let you know that the left cavalry has been handed over to me. The prince can rest assured, old marshal he can rest assured, and also you, Li Yanchao, can rest assured. We have to let everyone know that the left and right cavalry have always been arrogant and domineering, but we have the qualifications to be domineering. If you don't believe me, then let everyone open their eyes and watch. What to choose: Twin Jade Annulus, Ko Jianghuai, Xiexibei Chao Ben Lei Yuechi. In front of the seniors of the Su family's iron cavalry in the future, on the day of rewards, as long as you meet on the road, you have to obediently step aside. Lu Dun turned his head and looked directly at Li Yanchao. "Old Li, what do you think?" Li Yanchao sneered. "Your words are still acceptable. Whether or not you have the ability, I'll wait and see. Next, if the left cavalry can kill half as many enemies as my right cavalry, I'll treat you to a drink in North Town. If not, when you meet me at that time, scram to the side." Lu Dun reached out and patted Li Yanchao's head. "You brat, your temper is even worse than the great generals in the past." Li Yanchao, who had almost never been patted on the head in his life, was stunned. By the time he regained his senses, Lu Dun had already run away. At the entrance of the meeting hall, Partridge Zhou Kong, who had witnessed this shocking scene, also widened his eyes. He said helplessly, "This Lu Dun is really something. He even dares to touch Li Taisui's head." Su Fengyan dismissed it with a smile. He said softly, "If that's the case, the left and right cavalry's burden will be somewhat heavy." Zhou Kong snorted coldly. "Since your highness believes that Ko Jianghuai and his group of youths can make a name for themselves in Liuzhou, I can't be bothered to say anything about the muddled account of Qingyuan military town. However, even without the support of Stone Talisman Ning Amei and Yuan Nanting Old He's left cavalry and my right cavalry against Murong Baoding and Wang Yong and Helian Wei behind them, your highness can put your heart back into your stomach. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, then said, "The 30,000 Winter Thunder Cavalry and the 30,000 Ruren Cavalry can be considered Beimang's first-rate elite army in the Southern Dynasty. Beimang is willing to use such a large amount of bait. You must not let your guard down." Zhou Kong grunted in agreement. Su Fengnian suddenly clasped his fists towards the old commander who had once sent him off to the capital. He said, "Have a safe journey." Partridge Zhou Kong also clasped his fists and said in a low voice, "Only death, only death." The two were well aware. In reality, only death. Chapter 1957. Liuzhou was on the verge of erupting. At that time, neither side in Liangmang realized that this was going to be a battle that would determine the outcome of the war. It would be on par with the Battle of the Western Wall that ended the chaos of the spring and autumn period. After Northern Mang's great commander Huang Songpu achieved a great victory, he rushed downwards in an imposing manner, heading straight for Lu Province's central Green Sky City. At the same time, Northern Mang's emperor who wanted to make the final decision didn't hesitate to empty out Gusai Prefecture's military forces, transferring 40,000 Southern Dynasty's border elite troops to reinforce Huang Songpu's main force. The two main relay routes that connected more than 30 large and small military towns were packed with people. Without stopping to rest, they rushed south. Both armies gathered on the vast plains to the left of the Old Woman Mountain. This place was less than 70 miles away from Xianxia city. Not long ago, Liuzhou General Ko Jianghuai had given Beimang a huge victory on the northern battlefield, greatly boosting the morale of Beimang's north and south capitals. However, whether it was the Beiliang Governor-General House or the North Jebei City Manor, they did not demote Ko Jianghuai. Hence, Ko Jianghuai was still the main commander of this battle. He led 10,000 young Liuzhou cavalry, 20,000 Long Xiang army, which was a level higher than the Liuzhou cavalry, and 16,000 Lantua mountain monk soldiers under his command. Probably because they knew that this battle would determine the ownership of the entire Liuzhou territory, Xianxia city also sent out the 3,000 cavalry that were under the provincial governor's manor. The four Liuzhou powers had a huge disparity in numbers, and there were close to 50,000 troops in Liuzhou. Could be said that they were staking everything on one throw and Ko Jianghuai had full control over them. Although Liang Mang and Huang Songpu's forces had a smaller advantage compared to their initial numbers, the grassland cavalry still had the upper hand in terms of numbers and morale. This was mainly due to Ko Jianghuai's muddle-headed deployment of troops. The Lantua mountain monk soldiers that rushed to assist Liuzhou were separated from the Liuzhou border cavalry, causing the Long Xiang army to suffer heavy casualties for the first time since it was formed. As a result, the morale of these troops was greatly boosted. After 3 battles, Huang Songpu's elite cavalry still had 12,000 cavalry left. If one counted the Qingcalan troops that were almost completely wiped out, they had lost more than half. From this, one could see that the Battle of Liuzhou was undoubtedly a tough one. These 10,000 elite cavalry were undoubtedly the stabilizing force for the next battle. Wanyan Yinjiang, who was born in Longguan Pass, had lost all face in the second battle. It was precisely because of his mistake that Northern Mang was unable to form a tight encirclement, allowing Ko Jianghuai's main force to break through the encirclement easily. His brother Wanyan Jinliang, who was the most powerful person in the Southern Dynasty, sent a secret letter to reprimand him before the biting emperor. The wording was extremely strict, and the meaning behind it was to tell Wanyan Yinjiang that if he was unable to redeem his family's face in Liuzhou, then the family would have to close the door to him. Before the third battle of Liuzhou began, Wanyan Yinjiang not only gathered all the generals in the army, but he also called all the centurions to the empty space outside the tent. He made everyone sign a military order that on the battlefield, if no one within 10 people was able to kill the enemy, then the squad leader and the centurion would be executed on the spot. A chiliarch would be demoted to a centurion. Therefore, in the third battle, Wanyan Yinjiang's cavalry soldiers were not afraid of death. After the battle, they indeed had a lot of gains. Their military exploits surpassed that of Huang Songpu's main force. They even left behind the Yi family's cavalry. When this report, personally written by Old Marshal Huang Songpu, was sent back to the 2 capitals of the grassland, the Wanyan army caused a sensation in the Southern Dynasty. The old lady was very happy and bestowed the Wanyan family with a total of 18 Xianbei belts. This meant that the Wanyan family would have an extra 18 Xieshui guards. More importantly, this battle ensured that the Wanyan family would sit firmly on the throne of the Southern Dynasty. However, the repercussions were that after going through that brutal battle, the Wanyan tribe's elite cavalry had been reduced to 14,000 men. In addition, the head of the Wanyan tribe, Wanyan Jinliang, had to stay on the second front outside of Liangzhou Pass. Similarly, with the impending battle, the Wanyan tribe's descendants had all left the nest. Among the troops that were sent to reinforce Liangzhou Pass, there wasn't a cavalry troop that belonged to the Wanyan family. Currently, in the southern border of Beimang, Gusai Prefecture and Longyao Prefecture, other than the troops and horses that were sent south to attack Liangzhou Pass, the rest of the troops that were stationed there had been influenced by the remnants of Hongjia's people who had fled to the north. They had long known that this was a rare commodity that was worth hoarding. This was especially so when the importance of Gusai Prefecture was slightly lower than Longyao Prefecture, where the central army of Beimang was located. Coincidentally, it was a critical moment for the troops that were sent south to reinforce Liangzhou Pass. Almost all of the troops guarding Liangzhou Pass and Maolong Pass had privately offered a price. After all, going south to Laolong Pass was the general trend, and no one could refuse the emperor's order. However, there were a lot of things that needed to be done under the table. For example, the Wanyan family was afraid that Wanyan Yinjiang would make a mistake in the next battle due to the lack of troops, so they secretly offered a price to Ligu and Maolong towns, which were second only to tile-building Gentleman's Pavilion, in an attempt to persuade the two cavalry troops to take care of the imperial army during the Battle of Laolong Mountain. Unexpectedly, the two generals of the two towns firmly refused. It turned out that the Yi families that were also on the front lines of Liuzhou Pass had already taken the initiative to spend a large amount of money to form a temporary alliance with them. Furthermore, the price they offered was much more sincere than the reserved Wanyan family. For example, the Yi family that bought Maolong Town's 5,000 cavalry troops not only promised that the daughter of the family would be married to the eldest son of the cavalry general, but they also offered chests of gold and silver that amounted to 400,000 taels of silver to Maolong Town. Logically speaking, after 3 fierce battles in a row, the 2nd Cavalry, which had the weakest combat power and the largest number of soldiers, should have suffered the heaviest losses. However, the result was unimaginable. Before the southern expedition, there were more than 40,000 cavalrymen of mixed brands. Of the 40,000 cavalrymen who survived to advance to the battlefield of Crone Mountain with their commander-in-chief, Huang Songpu, there were still 34,000 cavalrymen who survived. In addition to the military forces of Gusai Province, which were advancing south at full speed, the 40,000 cavalrymen of the Southern Dynasty who had been recuperating in the rear from the beginning to the end were all kept by the second noble families with a large sum of money. Apart from the 20,000 cavalrymen who were the old king of the southern courtyard, Huang Songpu's old subordinates who would obviously follow the old commander-in-chief's lead, the remaining 20,000 cavalrymen were all divided up by the second noble families. Huang Songpu, who had already lost his position as the king of the southern courtyard, could do nothing about it. The old lady sitting on the dragon throne, who was concerned about the central plains, turned a blind eye to it. Huang Songpu, who had a large number of reinforcements, did not act rashly. Otherwise, in this grand battle that was about to begin, the main battlefield would be under Xianxia city, and not on Crone Mountain, which was like a small island floating alone in the sea. The area to the right of Crone Mountain was dozens of li with strong winds and strong sand. The large expanse of rugged terrain was naturally extremely difficult for cavalry to gallop through. In the first battle between Liang Mang and Lu Gui, the cavalry under Crone Mountain had successfully advanced south from the plains on the left flank of Crone Mountain. However, at that time the border army of Liuzhou was only defending the city to the death. Their military strength was also relatively weak. The refugees had not yet joined the army on a large scale, and the Longxiang army was alone. The main force in the field was not enough to support a large-scale cavalry battle far away from Xianxia city. As a result, they did not choose to take the initiative to intercept. However, it was clear that today was different from the past. After Ko Jianghuai obtained the complete military power of a province, coupled with the fact that the Beiliang governor-general and the young vassal king attached great importance to Liuzhou, Ko Jianghuai not only fought 3 soul-stirring interception battles, he also resolutely chose the flat and vast Crone Mountain as the final battlefield. If they won, the Beimang cavalry would never be able to see the walls of Xianxia city. If they lost, then not only would Xianxia City fall into the hands of the Beimang cavalry, Liuzhou would probably become a new province of the southern dynasty of Beimang. Crone Mountain was not tall and steep. Instead, it was like a large mound of dirt. The north and south slopes were enough for a small group of cavalry to ride their horses up to the top. Even the most muddle-headed general would feel that occupying Crone Mountain to look down on the battlefield was beneficial for him to assess the situation and mobilize his troops. Ko Jianghuai was one of the 2 Jade Annulus of Dechu, and Huang Songpu had once used his military exploits to become a meritorious general of the southern courtyard. Hence, the battle for the high ground of Crone Mountain had already begun before the 2 armies officially engaged in battle. Huang Songpu did not have the selfish intention of wasting the elites of the other divisions. He decisively sent out the remaining 400 green grass bars to climb up the mountain with shields and blades. The green grass bars had always been on the same level as the crow bars under Dong Zhuo and the black fox bars under General Lu Gui. They were ranked in the top 3. Although they were dismounted to fight, their bodies were strong and their strength was shocking. They were good at close combat. As expected, the Liuzhou side sent out 600 white horse crossbowmen, similarly armed with blades and shields. They climbed up the mountain at almost the same time. Both sides entered the battlefield of Crone Mountain at almost the same time and started to fight for Crone Mountain at almost the same time. This was probably the so-called coincidence of fate. Chapter 1958. Naturally, Huang Songpu did not think that 400 grassy barricades would be enough to take down the peak of Crone Mountain. After this batch of elite horse barricades, there were 600 men of sacrifice drawn from the various divisions. With the grassy barricades nailed to the peak of Crone Mountain, Wanyan Yinjiang and the other nobles and generals did not hesitate at all. In these 3 battles, Old Marshal Huang Songpu's performance was completely different from Dong Zhuo in the first battle of Liangmang. He did not take any actions to weaken the strength of the other divisions. Every time he fought to the death first and people died first. In these 3 difficult battles, Old Marshal Huang Songpu had reported to the emperor and was very protective of them. Twice he took all the blame and the 3rd time he generously gave out military merit. Under these circumstances, even the gloomy Wanyan Yinjiang would feel bad. Of the 600 men of sacrifice, Wanyan Yinjiang sent out 300 Wanyan disciples. As expected in a small-scale battle without the leeway brought by the warhorses, people died even faster. The 400 grassy barricades quickly died. Looking up from the foot of the mountain, the peak of Crone Mountain was filled with the figures of the remaining white horse crossbowmen. The 600 men of sacrifice of the southern court aggressively entered the battlefield. The side of Liuzhou seemed to only use the white horse crossbowmen as an opportunity to seize the initiative, and definitely did not have the intention of letting all the crossbowmen die at Crone Mountain. This was also within reason. The ownership of Crone Mountain was of course important, but it could not be considered crucial and could not be said to affect the outcome of the battle. If the battle between Liangmang and Liangmang was on the map of the Central Plains, where the tempo of the battle was slower than that of a cavalry battle, the gains and losses of Crone Mountain would be more significant. However, in a cavalry battle, especially a large-scale cavalry battle where both sides had accumulated more than 100,000 soldiers, and both sides were familiar with fighting on horseback, opportunities were often fleeting. In addition, Crone Mountain was not located at the center of the battlefield, but at a side away from the battlefield. When the time came, the side that lost Crone Mountain could very well take the initiative to move the main battlefield away from Crone Mountain. In this way, Crone Mountain's geographical advantage to observe the battlefield would be weakened. Therefore, both sides knew that the battle for Crone Mountain was bloody and bitter. To a large extent, it could be said that it was used to raise the morale of the soldiers at the foot of the mountain. Liuzhou's reinforcements quickly arrived at the peak of Crone Mountain, consisting of close to 1,000 Lantua mountain monk soldiers. The white horse wandering crossbowmen who had fought from outside Liangzhou Pass all the way to Liuzhou's border, compared to their mortal enemy Kinkolanzi who had been completely wiped out on the battlefield, their losses were not small either, close to 300 people dying on the mountain peak. At the foot of the southern slope of Crone Mountain, away from the main battlefield, the leading general Ko Jianghuai was actually among them. The military authority of the 10,000 Liuzhou youths had already been completely handed over to Qi Fulong Pass. As for the 20,000 Long Xiang army on the battlefield where they faced off against Beimang's main force, It was naturally Su Longxiang and Li Mofan who each led 10,000 cavalry. Ko Jianghuai only spoke about how to win this battle, how to deploy the troops in detail and how to generally deploy them, but he definitely would not interfere with the killing of the Longxiang army after they entered the battlefield. The 3,000 cavalry directly under the Liuzhou provincial governor's mansion also did not appear here, instead following behind the 10,000 cavalry from Chi Fulong Pass, forming a central army. The two wings were the even stronger 10,000 dragon elephant cavalry. Huang Songpu did not leisurely head to the foot of Crone Mountain's northern slope like Ko Jianghuai to oversee his own central army. When the old general vaguely saw the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain appear at the summit, the old general with a grave expression finally let out a light breath of relief. In the previous third battle, the monk soldiers of Xiaxibian were not even worth his weight in gold. They were practically a burden that held him back, allowing this Southern Dynasty great general to obtain a great victory that even Taiping Ming did not expect. His military service was so great that it shook the grasslands. However, in the depths of Huang Songpu's heart, he instead felt even more apprehension towards the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain that the Beimeng had obtained through winning the Battle of Miyun Pass. He was not as optimistic as many of the Southern Dynasty border army generals who believed that the reason for the defeat of the Liuzhou border army was that Ko Jianghuai intentionally suppressed Xiaxibian, whose name shook the world at the Battle of Miyun. Huang Songpu firmly believed that this was a trap set by Ko Jianghuai and Xiaxibian for him. If he was not careful, the people who would be strangled by the neck would be tens of thousands of grassland soldiers. Wanyan Yinjiang, who was holding an iron spear and wearing heavy armor, urged his horse over. He loudly asked, "Great General, when do we charge?" Huang Songpu glanced at the direction of Crone Mountain and calmly said, "Wait a little longer." Wanyan Yinjiang, who knew the inside story of the military, was a little puzzled. Other than the 400 grassland soldiers and the 600 death warriors of the Southern Dynasty, the old general still had a backup plan. A total of 1,500 elite soldiers. Using these elite soldiers to fight for Crone Mountain showed how much importance he placed on it. However, even Wanyan Yinjiang, who was not as talented in military strategy as the old general, knew that the number of soldiers he had was still too little. With the Beiliang Frontier Army's character of wanting to lose people, they could not afford to lose face. At the very least, they would need to add another 1,000 soldiers to ensure that they would be able to take over Crone Mountain. One Crone Mountain was only worth this price. If more soldiers were sent in, more people would die on the mountain. For both sides, Liang Mang and Liang Mang, it would be a loss. The old general Huang Songpu obviously did not plan to take over Crone Mountain from the start. Instead, it was more of a test. After going through 3 battles, Wanyan Yinjiang knew his own worth. His arrogant personality had long been smoothed out. He was completely convinced of the old general's ability in military strategy. Since Huang Songpu said to wait a little longer, Wanyan Yinjiang, who was bound to the old general for good or ill, did not say any more nonsense. The figures of soldier monks appeared on the surface of the water in an endless stream. These monks of Mount Lantua, who possessed extraordinary combat strength, were especially eye-catching on the summit of Old Woman Mountain. 1,500 Northern Mang and Southern Dynasty border soldiers all bravely sacrificed themselves. In the end, there were still 200 monks of Lantua Mountain standing at the peak of Crone Mountain. Their robes were bright red and dazzling. Furthermore, the number of Lu Province soldiers was still increasing. They displayed a ferocious attitude as if they were going to take down this old lady of Crone Mountain. Wanyan Yinjiang quietly stopped his horse beside the old general. His brows were tightly furrowed. With the last of their reinforcements all dead, this also meant that Crone Mountain could be considered the exclusive property of the Lu Province cavalry. Huang Songpu hesitated for a moment. He turned his head and asked, "General Wanyan, how many people do you think the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain have sent out for Crone Mountain?" Wanyan Yinjiang subconsciously replied, "From the looks of it, 1,000 people have died in battle." Huang Songpu dismissed it with a laugh. He did not bother about this Beimeng noble's irrelevant answer. He raised his head to look at the clear sky. He nodded and muttered to himself, "No matter what, we can start fighting." Along the not-so-steep southern slope of Crone Mountain, 3 young men slowly led their horses forward. Lu Province's General Ko Jiangjun, Beiliang's only remaining white horse crossbowman Captain Li Hanlin, and Lu Province's Deputy General Chen Shiliang, who had personally brought 3,000 reinforcements to Ko Jianghuai. Other than the hundreds of monk soldiers on the peak, there were no other soldiers at the foot of the mountain behind the three. Other than the white horse crossbowmen resting on the ground, there were no other soldiers. Li Hanlin was the first to leave the group. Together with his fellow officers, he moved the corpses of those who had died in battle down the mountain. Not far from Li Hanlin, there was a tall man dressed in ordinary border army attire without a saber. What was even stranger was that everyone ignored him. As they approached the peak, Qin Shiliang asked softly, "General Ko, how did you guess that Huang Songpu would use less than 3,000 people to fight for Crone Mountain?" Ko Jianghuai smiled. "After fighting 3 battles with him, I have a general idea of Huang Songpu's temperament. He is a seasoned and prudent general. He knows that Crone Mountain can't decide the direction of the battle. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't know the whereabouts of the monk soldiers of Lontua Mountain, he wouldn't have sent the last 1,500 people to their deaths. Now he can see that I am determined to use the monk soldiers of Lontua Mountain to take Crone Mountain. I guess the old man will be relieved. Because I gave a strict order from the beginning that no one of Beimang's men of sacrifice is allowed to live on the peak and pass on the military intelligence after seeing the details of the situation at the foot of the mountain. So I had no choice but to ask Li Hanlin's follower, the Grandmaster, to secretly help me in order to prevent Huang Songpu from guessing how many monk soldiers are stationed on the southern slope." Finally reaching the top of the mountain, Qin Shiliang looked to the north and said bitterly, "Even if he knows that there are only 1,500 monk soldiers on the southern side of Crone Mountain, I believe that Huang Songpu will never be able to guess where the main force of the monk soldiers is. Because even I, Qin Shiliang, still find it inconceivable." The Liuzhou general said expressionlessly, "Life and death are decreed by fate, riches and honor are up to the heavens." His appearance on that battlefield was Xie Shibian's own choice. Moreover, I, Ko Jianghuai, did not want to stop him. Qin Shiliang, who was in a complicated mood, could only sigh. During the Battle of Miyun, Xie Shibian defended the mountain pass to the death. Following this, Xie Shibian had to personally lead 10,000 monk soldiers to resist the 60,000 reinforcements from the southern border alone. His goal was to have the Liuzhou cavalry work together with the Qingyuan army to swallow up Huang Songpu's main force. Even Qin Shiliang, who was a layman in military affairs, knew that in some battlefields one could fight to the death but in other battlefields one could not. Qin Shiliang could not understand. Ko Jianghuai did not personally give the order, but Xie Shibian had already taken the initiative to bring up this matter. At that time, everyone, including Su Longxiang, Li Mofen and Liuzhou provincial governor Yang Guangdou, were hesitant. This was because everyone knew that even if all 20,000 of the Lontua mountain monk soldiers were added together, in the young king's mind, they were not as important as Xie Shibian, who he had personally taken away from West Chu. Only Ko Jianghuai dared to openly agree and let Xie Shibian die. In the rugged area west of Crone Mountain, Xie Shibian stopped his horse. Behind him were more than 10,000 monk soldiers. Everyone had abandoned their blades and carried large shields, holding long spears to stop the horse. When the middle-aged warrior monk who acted as the scout returned and reported that there were no Beimang scouts 10 li ahead, the main general Xie Shibian raised his arm and moved forward. Only then did the troops continue to move forward quickly. Xie Shibian, whose lips were dry, grinned and exhaled softly. For some reason he thought of the delicate girl who often walked past his door with her head down and sunbathing when he was young. South of Bailiang there was her. The reason was enough. Chapter 1959. On the vast plains to the north of Crone Mountain, the sound of a bugle horn shook the heavens. Huang Songpu had 12,000 cavalrymen, 14,000 Wanyan elite cavalrymen, and 34,000 second cavalry. Among them, there were also 500 to 600 rare heavy cavalrymen who were fully equipped with armor. The northern Mang cavalry that had been accumulating power and waiting to set out stretched out 5 or 6 li in length, continuing without end. Compared to Bailiang's Liuzhou border army, which only had 30,000 cavalry, Beimang's morale was not inferior. Their military strength was far superior. Commander Huang Songpu did not purposely try to win by surprise. Although the battlefield was vast, this general, who had been the #1 person in the southern dynasty for more than a decade, did not try his best to spread out the front lines. It was obvious that he did not plan to fight a chaotic battle of unprecedented scale. He also did not split into left, middle and right formations like the Liuzhou border army. Instead he used his own troops as the vanguard with the Wanyan elite cavalry following closely behind. The E cavalry, which had the largest number of people, brought up the rear. In this way the northern Liang border cavalry, who had the advantage of natural armor, could be weakened to the greatest extent. While ensuring the thickness of their formation, it could force the Liuzhou cavalry into the mud and reduce the number of repeated charges. On the other hand, to be able to make the grassland cavalry that was described in the spring and autumn annals as the western and northern borders were filled with fierce cavalry that came and went like the wind, and the central plains were unstoppable unless it was a high city, they had no choice but to use such a stable formation to fight. This in itself showed the exceptional strength of the Bailiang cavalry. Ko Jianghuai and Qin Shiliang stood at the peak of Crone Mountain, their field of vision extremely good. Overlooking the battlefield, they could see that after Liang Meng's cavalry began their charge at the same time, they were like two waves of flood bursting through a dike, colliding into each other. Qin Shiliang had never considered himself to be an expert in military affairs. When facing the battlefield, he also did not have the hot-bloodedness of a general. It could even be said that this talented second-generation Su family strategist of the Tide Listening Pavilion had an instinctive dislike of killing on the battlefield. The Confucian school advocated cultivating the body, governing the family and governing the country. The essence, or perhaps the root, lay in the word governing and peace. Therefore the world was governed and peaceful. This was the true home of a scholar. Qin Shiliang subconsciously turned his head and saw Ko Jianghuai holding his horse with one hand and his blade with the other. His expression was calm. Qin Shiliang was often compared to Su Beiji, who was also a strategist of Mount Qingliang. This was just like how the imperial court of West Chu liked to comment on the twin jade annulus of Dechu Ko Jianghuai and Xieshi. It was the same logic as how the West Chu imperial court always liked to comment on the twin jade annulus of Dechu Ko Jianghuai and Xieshi. In Bailiang Pass officialdom and the border army outside the pass, Qin Shiliang and the higher-ranked transport envoy Su Beiji were polar opposites. The Bailiang border army recognized Qin Shiliang, who had personally experienced the first great battle of Liang Mang. They believed that Qin Shiliang had truly inherited the mantle of Tide Listening Pavilion Li Yishan. In the future he might have a chance to reach a transcendent height that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Li Yishan. However, the officialdom of the three provinces, especially Liangzhou and Lingzhou, where Su Beiji had lived before, regarded Su Beiji even more highly. They viewed him as a true pillar of Bailiang, a talent comparable to Li Yang's Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. He had the stature of a prime minister that could only be achieved by one person in a generation. On the other hand, Qin Shiliang was probably no more than a military strategist at the border or a minister in the central government. Qin Shiliang paid no attention to these comments about the undercurrents of Bailiang's upper echelons. This was because of his temperament. Although he was born into a humble family in Gangnam-do and did not even have the qualifications to sit at the same table as famous scholars, compared to many officials in the Liyang imperial court who seemed to have suddenly turned yellow overnight after passing the imperial examinations, Qin Shiliang was more open-minded. Instead, there were often people who half-jokingly said to him that Su Beiji had a competitive heart. Even the provincial governor Yang Guangdou did not mince his words. Whether a gentleman competed or not depended on the timing. He warned Qin Shiliang that Qin Shiliang could not truly not compete for anything and only give in. As for the twin jade annulus of Dechu, who was currently leading troops and fighting alongside him in Liuzhou, Qin Shiliang felt that he had a slightly better impression of Xie Bian, who came to Liuzhou later than him. He and this person, one was scholarly and one was martial, but their backgrounds were similar. They were both at the bottom of the marketplace. Moreover, compared to the proud and arrogant Guangling Dao descendant Ko Jianghuai, Xie Bian was more in line with the image of a scholar as a gentleman. Interacting with him was like bathing in the spring breeze. Ko Jianghuai was always like the blazing sun in the midday summer sky, dazzling and dazzling. But even so, the deeper Qin Shiliang interacted with Ko Jianghuai, the more sincere his admiration for him grew. He remembered reading history when he was young. He read, "One does not rejoice in victory, one does not feel discouraged in defeat. One who is as calm as a lake even when there is a thunderstorm in his chest can become a general." At this time and place in Crone Mountain, Qin Shiliang gazed at Ko Jianghuai's resolute profile. In his heart he sighed, "A master of the art of war should be like this." Ko Jianghuai did not turn his head. He suddenly said, If I win this war but Xia Shibian dies in battle, then to me Bailiang wins and I lose. Qin Shiliang, who had been immersed in officialdom for many years, naturally understood the mystery. He asked curiously, since this is the case, why did Ko Jiangjun agree to General Xie's generosity and go north? Chapter 1960. Ko Jianghuai smiled and said slowly, in the Battle of Spring and Autumn at the West Wall, do you know how many cavalrymen were really involved in the battle? Actually, the total was less than 140,000, far less than the 40,000 to 50,000 infantrymen sent in at once in the middle and later stages of the battle. It was because both sides had used up a lot of military strength before the final battle, and the cavalry had suffered heavy casualties early on. It was also because the Guangling Road territory was not suitable for large-scale cavalry to fight together. So, not to mention me and Xia Shibian, even Chao Chongqing and all the people in the Central Plains who use troops will have a knot in their hearts, and that is to have a proper cavalry battle with the grassland cavalry that is said to be invincible after the Great Feng. There is no need to rely on the dangerous pass, no need to defend the city to the death, just on the flat terrain of the battlefield, warhorse against warhorse, warblade against warblade. At this point Ko Jianghuai paused for a moment. His hands let go of the reins and the handle of the warblade, and he suddenly clenched his fists and smashed them together. Meet force with force, let's have a proper battle. Ko Jianghuai's eyes were burning. Victory! Our cavalry of the Central Plains will win. Even Qin Shiliang, a civil official who despised casualties on the battlefield, couldn't help but feel a surge of strong emotions when he heard these words. Ko Jianghuai reached out an arm and pointed at the battlefield at the foot of the mountain where the two armies were about to collide. Coincidentally, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is in front of me and Xia Shibian. I want to win, he also wants to win, so no matter what, we can't lose. However, Xia Shibian is more ruthless. For this battle he is willing to pay the price with his life. I'm not as good as him, and I'm only willing to bear the price of a dark future in Bailiang. An ambitious person values success or failure, and a hero doesn't care about death. Maybe in the history books Xia Shibian will be praised more than me. Qin Shiliang had nothing to say. On the battlefield to the right of Crone Mountain, the battle between the two sides reached 100,000 cavalry. It was spectacular and tragic. To increase the strength of the formation, the refugee young cavalry in the middle of the three cavalry armies of Liuzhou led the charge with 6,000 men of the direct collision camp, jumping out of the original front line. In the first charge, Huang Songpu did not use the armored cavalry that was worthy of its name. Instead, he hid them outside the battlefield, and it was still the old commander himself who led the elite cavalry under his direct command. It was still this old general who had once been the king of the southern courtyard leading the charge. Abandoning the tactic of luring the enemy and wandering about, the cavalry clashing into the formation was exchanging lives. The 6,000 direct collision battalion acted as the tip of the cone formation. As they accelerated, they gradually reduced the width of their front line and collided with the 12,000 cavalry under Huang Songpu. The Chong of Liuzhou was like a giant drill to cut open a mountain. Including the collision camp, the direct and the cavalry, and the Bian Bailiang and the cavalry. The deeper they dug into the formation, the easier it was for the two dragon elephant armies at the sides of the conical formation to tear through the northern Mang cavalry's thickness. Huang Songpu's front, middle and rear formations in this kind of simple collision formation displayed an astonishing effect. The 12,000 men led by the old commander were all top elites who had been through many battles. They were originally better than the Liuzhou border cavalry made up of refugees. Both sides separated from each other, advancing 500 steps forward. There were Flo province cavalry soldiers who were continuously knocked off their horses, directly smashing into the 2,000 cavalry at the very front of the camp. 5 or 6 out of 10 died on the spot. Under the continuous collision of this type of cavalry formation, it was often impossible for them to even slow down the northern Mang enemy cavalry. It was to the extent where the northern Mang cavalry didn't even need to deliberately remove their heads. Their warhorses could just charge straight through. The 14,000 Wanyan elite cavalry did not follow closely behind Huang Songpu's cavalry. Instead, they opened up a 600 to 700 step gap between the two armies. With that, Wanyan Yinjiang's family private army was able to launch a second charge. When the remaining 7,000 Liuzhou cavalry broke out of the formation of Huang Songpu's cavalry, they faced the Wanyan elite cavalry who had raised their speed to the max. One side's speed and momentum were decreasing, while the other side's momentum was at its peak. The result of the collision was obvious. The 14,000 Wanyan elite cavalry held their spears and charged forward. Relying on the impact of the charge, they were extremely heavy. 500 Liuzhou border cavalry were actually brushed past and died on the backs of their horses. The perfect soldier cavalry at the back even had the time to grab the chance to stab those Liuzhou cavalry who had unfortunately fallen to the ground. When this Liuzhou cavalry that broke through the formation twice finally met the B cavalry with the largest number of people, they had already suffered heavy losses. Luckily, their sacrifice reduced the pressure on the two wings of the Long Xiang army. No matter if the wild goose flew north or south, it was always the leading goose that had the most difficulty. It was even more so when the formation on the battlefield was like flying geese. Although the cavalry gathered by the High School had the thickest formation and the longest depth, they did not pose much of a threat to the Liuzhou cavalry. Facing the charge of the Long Xiang army, which did not suffer many losses, they were at a disadvantage. It was just a change of battlefield position. Both sides of Liangmang were covered in corpses. However, both sides still maintained a relatively stable formation. This meant that in the next charge more people would die and it would be easier. Qin Shiliang stood on the mountain peak. After personally witnessing this intense clash, he kept silent. If one only judged from the Old Woman Mountain battlefield, based on the current situation, the final victor would be Beimang. Ko Jianghuai was expressionless from start to finish. Not enough people had died here, and the northern Mang did not feel that the achievements were at their fingertips. Or if Huang Songpu sensed that something was wrong, the final encirclement of the Crone Mountain would not be able to stop the main force of the northern Mang at all. After all, this was not the Calabash Pass of Yuzhou that was blessed by nature, and there were no terrifying troops like the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry and the two northern Liang Heavy Cavalry responsible for blocking the retreat. Ko Jianghuai turned his head and looked toward the southeast. Chapter 1961. Northern Liang Path's two new relay routes within Lu Province's territory were both horizontal, separately leading to Liang and Ling provinces, far less meticulous than the Pass Inner Province's 3 provinces. This was also a helpless move. The vast Lu province only had 3 military towns to rely on, yet it was bordered by northern Mang's powerful Gusai province. That was why building longitudinal relay routes within Lu province could only make it easier for the grassland cavalry to drive south. This was a move that destroyed one's own border. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if that young vassal king mysteriously lost his head, overestimating his own abilities and exhausting his military, building relay routes in Lu province, Green Azure City's provincial governor manor, Huayang Pass Protectorate Manor and Clear Frost Mountain would all rebel at the same time. The plains on the right side of Crone Mountain was the most suitable terrain for cavalry outside of Xianxia City. The location chosen by Ko Jianghuai for the third intercepting battle after the 2 great victories was a yellow sand plain about 200 li north of Crone Mountain. Between that plain and Crone Mountain, there was a huge corridor running north and south. It was roughly shaped like a woman's waist. If the grassland cavalry were to advance from north to south, although this wasn't a path they had to pass through to reach the battlefield of Crone Mountain, compared to taking a detour, it could shorten the distance by 60 li. Furthermore, this corridor wasn't narrow or steep, definitely not a winding path. It was impossible to set up an ambush on both sides. On the contrary, the mountains on both sides of the corridor were flat. The width of the corridor was roughly the same, about 1.5 li. It could be said that a large group of cavalry could pass through it without any hindrance. The so-called corridor was shaped like a woman's waist, but that was only in comparison to the entire Liuzhou territory. As a result, from the first battle of Liangmang, when Lu Wei's cavalry went south, to the second battle of Ko Jianghuai, when the 3 intercepting battles, neither side had set their eyes on this place that the refugees had named Grasshopper's Leg. However, amidst the grandiose reinforcement of the 50,000 southern border cavalry, when almost everyone could see the northern entrance of this corridor, there was already a group of Lu province soldiers in the middle of the corridor. They had been waiting for a long time. When Ma Lanzi hurriedly reported back to the Beimang generals, the 50,000 cavalry fell into an awkward situation. The Liuzhou infantry all assumed a posture of defending the corridor to the death. There were about 14,000 of them. The main force was the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain in the west, mixed in with 2,000 to 3,000 native Liuzhou soldiers. The bad news was that with this corridor as the battlefield, The cavalry couldn't move left and right. The good news was that the infantry army that was waiting in formation didn't bring any large-scale anti-horse machine. Once the cavalry army that already had the absolute advantage in terms of military strength smashed through the infantry army and forced them to retreat in panic, forget about 17 to 18,000 infantry, even if their military strength was doubled, it still wouldn't be enough for this cavalry army to cut down with their blades. After 20 years of fighting to the death at the border, the northern Mang Southern Dynasty cavalry no longer dared to underestimate the strength of the northern Liang cavalry or the Yuzhou infantry under Yan Wenluan's command. However, if it was any other troop, they really wouldn't think much of it. This wasn't blind arrogance, but rather the enormous confidence that the grassland cavalry had accumulated over the past 400 years since the end of the Great Feng Dynasty's era. Apart from this, the reason that made the southern generals feel troubled was that from the moment they left the camp to the battlefield at Crone Mountain, whether it was the king's tent in Baiting, the nearby temple in Shijing, or the commander-in-chief Huang Songpu who was fighting in the south, they were all strictly ordered to participate in the battle on time. At the crucial moment, the entire battle would be decided and all the main forces in Liuzhou would be wiped out. Thus, the 50,000 cavalry could not miss the opportunity at all. Right now, the difficult problem facing these southern dynasty generals who grasped military authority wasn't just whether or not they should take a longer detour, because the monk soldiers in the middle of the corridor could similarly quickly withdraw to the south. Perhaps if they changed the battlefield, the northern Mang cavalry could break through the formations even faster. But the consumption of traveling 60 li of additional distance was definitely not a price these southern dynasty generals, large and small, could endure. Moreover, the military merit of more than 10,000 Western region monk soldiers, especially Xianxia Bian, whose head might be exchanged for the merit of being granted a noble rank, was just too tempting. Should they fight or not? Of course they would. Whether it was for public or private reasons, the Beimang cavalry felt that they had to fight in this corridor to obtain a large amount of military merit. The 18 Xinbei jade belts that the emperor had recently bestowed to the Wanyan family were the best example. With great merit in front of them, how could the 50,000 cavalry, whose stamina and spirit were at their peak, not be able to break through the formation of more than 10,000 infantry soldiers? On the other side of the corridor, Xianxia Bian, wearing armor and a war blade at his waist, sat on the back of a horse and looked toward the north. The wind blew in his face, and it was as if he could already smell the scent of blood. This deputy general of Liuzhou, who was known as one of Dechu's twin jade annulus, had a firm gaze and a calm expression. Chao Zhongqing had once privately commented with the Empress of West Chu Jiangxi about the generals and ministers of the dynasty. Most of them were mediocre, but when it came to Xianxia Bian's proud disciple, he was unexpectedly not stingy with his praises. Especially when he said, using troops on the battlefield turning stone into gold. These 8 words carried the most weight. But in the end he added a comment that seemed to be a digression. Xianxia Bian's tenacity and perseverance surpasses Ko Jianghuai's. Xianxia Bian slowly closed his eyes. This young man that even the young emperor of Liang wanted to recruit into Great Peace City was now a citizen of Dechu but a general of Beiliang. Dechu had been invincible for 200 years during the spring and autumn period. They relied on 3 things to defeat their enemies: strong armor, strong bows, long spears, and military orders. When Dechu was at the peak of its power, it had once beaten Liang and Dongyu to the north of the country like a strong man beating a young child. Even though Great Chu's military strength had declined from its peak and Liang, located in the northern corner of the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, had begun to pay attention to cultivating cavalry, before the 120,000 great halberd warriors were completely wiped out in the Battle of Scenic River, the entire Central Plains still believed that the Liang cavalry of a certain scale would not be able to gain the slightest advantage against the heavily armored infantry that was hailed as the most powerful in history. However, in the Battle of Scenic River, reality had proven that on a suitable battlefield, heavily armored infantry that did not have enough cavalry supporting them could only wait for death no matter how many there were. They might not necessarily lose, but they definitely would not obtain a great victory. That classic battle in the history books was far inferior to the one at West Leby. It had always been underestimated and looked down upon by Li Yang's historians and militarists. First of all, in the 3 battles not many soldiers actually died on both sides, only 30,000. Second, the Su family army that had achieved a great victory with the combination of cavalry and infantry chose to brutally bury more than 80,000 surrendered soldiers in order to prevent any mistakes in the crucial battle that followed. In addition, the old emperor of Liang Zhao Li had once sent an old general with meritorious service and 2 Zhao clan relatives to participate in the battle. Therefore, it was inconvenient for Zhao Dun to spread the taboo of ascending the throne and claiming the title of venerable. However, that battle of Jinghe had a great impact on the victorious Su family. When Su Shao and his subordinates were touring the battlefield, he squatted down and stared at the fine armor of a Dechu halberd soldier. Long sabers hacked and spears stabbed, but it was still mostly intact. He sighed, "The person is already dead, but the armor is still intact. If I had armor like this, how many people would die? We can't continue to be so poor." Chapter 1962. From then on, the Su family, who only wanted military merit and not silver, every time they broke through a city or camp, they began to secretly seize the weapons and gold. Countless Liang officials criticized them for stuffing their own pockets. This was not an unjust accusation. Of course, Su Shao never denied this. Especially at the end of the Battle of the Western Wall, Su Shao made a rebellious move. It was precisely because of this that most of the incense between the Su and Zhao families died. Su Shao issued a secret order to his subordinate, Cavalry General Su Pu, and his 2 adopted sons, Qin Zhibao and Yuan Zuozong. The 3 of them worked together and successfully allowed the Su family to secretly gather 10,000 soldiers and horses. They took the lead in breaking through West Chu's capital before the Liyang selected candidates. Afterwards, they wantonly searched for all the treasures and gold that could be carried away in chests. Su Zhao's famous sentence, "Shit tastes good but it doesn't taste good," came from after the plundering. When the Liyang military sent an envoy to denounce him, Lame Su got straight to the point. "The things are already in my stomach. If you want them, I can only give you shit. Do you want to eat it?" It was said that when the old emperor Zhao Li heard this report, he was so angry that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, Su Shao just symbolically spat out some spoils of war to the imperial army and left the matter unsettled. After being granted the title of king and vassal of the northwest border, Su Zhao's obsession with weapons and horses could be said to have become even more intense. Rather than saying that the Beiliang cavalry was the best in the world, it was better to say that the army and horses were the best in the world. In these 20 years, the smuggling of ironware to the Beimang grasslands and the endless border of Liyang never stopped despite repeated prohibitions. The 2 Beiliang border armies, who enjoyed half of the country's taxes, constantly made small movements that were extremely difficult to stop. It wasn't until Qin Zhibao temporarily served as the former Minister of War and Gu Jiantang left the capital to personally oversee the north that the 2 most powerful generals in the military worked closely together on this matter that they succeeded. Even in the Beiliang Frontier Army, which had strict military law, there were still several captains with real power who were beheaded on the spot because of this. The implications were broad, from the generals inside the pass to the generals with real power outside the pass, to the captains of the pass, and finally to the big and small beacons. Often, close to 100 heads would fall in one incident. The grassland cavalry had never lacked horses, but they lacked armor. After the old lady ascended the throne, Beimang's outlook had changed greatly. Borrowing the momentum of Hongjia's rush to the north, the entire country from top to bottom, from the iron smelting technique to the military equipment, was the same. However, there were some things that were deeply ingrained in the nomads. Even after 20 years of influence, it was still difficult to change. For example, the Chang cavalry that was destroyed in the northwest of Liuzhou, the famous Beimang Southern Dynasty's Chang cavalry, and the Ruren cavalry that Hong Jingyan led, were known as the most important border cavalry. With the old lady's foresight and the importance of the Southern Dynasty's Xijing imperial court, how could she not have the foundation and courage to equip 10,000 Chang cavalry with good equipment? However, the Chang cavalry maintained the light cavalry path of leather armor, fast horses, short knives, and short spears. This couldn't be simply seen as a sectarian bias of the Beimang cavalry. It was more of the times that made heroes. The sound of the hooves of the Beimang cavalry became louder and louder. Added to the natural echo of the corridor, and the roar of the Beimang after they thought that victory was in their grasp, it was like a thunderclap on the ground. The momentum was extremely majestic. Xiaxibian suddenly opened his eyes and pulled out the cold knife at his waist. He shouted angrily, "Formation! Barricade the horse!" This time using the infantry formation to stop the 50,000 Beimang cavalry. Xianxia had the right to distribute 5,000 bows and crossbows from the Liuzhou provincial governor's mansion. He also asked for 800 horse lances and 1,000 mo knives from the Liangzhou border army. The mo knife was popular in the southern Tang during the spring and autumn period. It weighed more than 50 catties and was made of fine iron. Only the best soldiers in the army could wield it. In the past, the southern Tang border had 16 towns and more than 70,000 soldiers and horses. There were only about 2,000 mo knife soldiers. They were so strong that they were once hailed as the king of white blades. It was believed that if they could gather 10,000 mo knives to guard the country's gate, they could stop 100,000 invading cavalry. After the first famous general in the old southern Tang, Gu Dezhu, followed the then heir of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, into Bailiang, in addition to being the deputy commander of the infantry, with the full support of the young feudal lord, he earnestly asked Gu Dezhu to help the Mahisjizi create a new type of mo knife so that it could be given to the Bailiang border army in the future. Compared to the 50 catties mo knife of the southern Tang soldiers in history, because the men of Bailiang were more robust and had greater strength, the well-deserved Zamadeo of Bailiang was heavier. The Mahisjizi Song Chongsui jokingly named it Knife 60. It was a pity that they started to make it before the First Liangmang War. Until now they had only tried their best to make 1,000 of them. Moreover, it was difficult to use them on the battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass. Then Xianxia asked for all of them. Other than that, there were also the 1,000 long lances. These lances were more expensive to make than the mo knife. The degree of rarity was enough to make people speechless. Only the son of a military family could use a horse lance. This was an iron law since the birth of the horse lance. First, no matter if it was a horse lance or a horse lance, it was extremely long and difficult to use. Ordinary cavalry using it would be like drawing legs on a snake. Second, it took a long time to make. It was said that it took at least 3 years to make a lance. It had always been the number one hobby of the cavalry of the Central Plains. It was even harder to find than a good horse that was worth thousands of gold. The young feudal lord personally ordered the 800 lances. It was a number that almost took all of the Su family's wealth to gather. If it were not for the fact that the Bailiang military law did not allow cavalry to use lances because of their status, and that Su Shao, who was used to living a hard life and was afraid of being poor, had the intention to wantonly collect lances from the military depot during the later stages of the Spring and Autumn War, it would be wishful thinking. In the corridor, the Liuzhou infantry formed by the monk soldiers of Mount Lantual blocked the horse. At the very front where the lances pointing outwards, the cold light was like snow. 300 people formed a horizontal line forming 3 rows. The first row held lances and knelt, their lances slanted forward. The second row held their lances flat and pointed forward. The third row held their lances on the shoulders of the soldiers in front, also slanted forward. In front of the 3 rows of lances, there were actually 2 rows of sturdy monk soldiers holding their huge shields with their hands and shoulders. After the lances, there were 4 rows of tall monk soldiers with 200 people in each row, holding mo swords that could kill 800 horses. The battle was imminent. The 800 people sat on the ground to rest. Even when the Beimang cavalry blew the horn to charge without the order of the general, the 800 mo swordsmen still could not get up. They had to save as much strength as possible. Once the lances and horses were all killed, the 800 mo swordsmen would charge forward like a wall. Great ancestor Gu once said that in front of the mo sword of southern Tang, men and horses would be crushed. After this, there were 2,000 Liuzhou border soldiers and 3,000 monks from Mount Lantual, equipped with 5,000 bows and crossbows. When the infantry formation faced the enemy cavalry, the first to stop the cavalry charge was actually the 5,000 archers at the back of the formation. After Xianxia gave the order to stop the horse, he did not continue to stop at the back of the infantry formation. Instead, he walked behind the archers and took down the shield hanging from the saddle. Then he held a blade in one hand and a shield in the other, standing at the front of the infantry formation formed by the remaining monk soldiers. The Beimang cavalry roared like thunder, and the Liuzhou infantry formation was as silent as a mountain. Life and death were decided in this unknown corridor. In the history books of the future, whether it was heavily exaggerated or lightly described, without exception, they would conclude this battle with 6 battles and 6 defeats. The fierceness of the battle could not be described in more words.